In the cool mist of the Guatemalan dawn, the city of Tikal stirred from its long night of silence. The jungle, ancient and endless, surrounded the limestone towers like a green sea, breathing slowly in the humid air. From the highest temple, the temple of the great jaguar, the first rays of the rising sun touched the carved stone faces of forgotten kings. Their eyes, sculpted with precision and reverence, gazed eternally toward the east, where the sun god Kinich Ahau was born again each morning. The people of Tikal rose with the sun, for their lives were woven tightly with its light. The city was alive, not merely with human sound, but with the rhythm of creation itself. The calls of parrots echoing through the ceiba trees, the rustle of jaguars unseen among the undergrowth, the deep, distant roll of thunder far beyond the hills. Life pulsed in harmony with the cycles of the heavens as it had for generations beyond memory. Among those who woke to this sacred dawn was a young man named Balaam, whose name meant jaguar. He was of the artisan class, trained by his father to carve stone and shape the faces of gods into the walls of temples. His dwelling was modest, built of limestone blocks smoothed by hand, with a roof of palm leaves that whispered when the wind passed through. From the small courtyard before his home, he could see the top of Temple 1 rising above the mist, golden under the first touch of light. Each morning before his work began, Balaam followed the same ritual his father had taught him. He washed his hands in cool water, gathered from a limestone basin, and raised his face toward the east. He did not speak. Words were unnecessary. The act itself was a prayer, a silent acknowledgement of the bond between the people and the gods, between the body and the earth that sustained it. To the Maya, the gods were not distant or abstract. They lived in the rain that fell, in the maize that grew, and in the breath of every living thing. The city around him was a marvel of human order within the wilderness. Wide causeways, or sakbiob, stretched from the heart of Tikal outward, linking temples, palaces, and plazas in a sacred geometry that mirrored the heavens. The priests of the city, keepers of the sacred calendars, had designed every structure with purpose. The alignment of temples followed the sun's path, marking solstices and equinoxes with precision that modern minds still struggled to comprehend. The Maya did not build merely to live. They built to remember the gods in stone. As the day grew brighter, Alam joined others in the plaza near the Temple of the Masks. The air was heavy with the scent of copal resin, burned in offering to the sun. Priests in white cotton robes moved slowly through the rising smoke, carrying vessels of maize, cacao, and jade beads, gifts to ensure balance in the cycles of the world. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture sacred. The people watched in silence, for the rituals were not spectacle but duty. The order of life depended on them. Tikal was at its height then, a kingdom of tens of thousands, ruled by divine kings who traced their lineage to the gods themselves. Yet even in its greatness, the city was bound by fragility. The land demanded respect, for the jungle was both generous and cruel. Maize, the sacred crop, required the blessing of Chak, the rain god, and the careful tending of countless hands. Water was life, stored in great reservoirs carved into the earth, for no rivers ran through the limestone plain. Without rain, the city would wither. Balaam understood this balance, though he was not a priest or scholar. In the stillness of his work, chiseling the faces of deities into stone, he felt the weight of what his people believed. That creation was a cycle of death and rebirth, that even gods required nourishment. Blood, maize, and time were the threads that held the world together. Each carving, each symbol he etched, was a small part of the grand order that kept the universe in motion. Above him, the cries of howler monkeys echoed like distant thunder. To the Maya, their voices were reminders of the gods' laughter, wild, unpredictable, and powerful. The forest was never silent. It spoke constantly if one learned to listen. Even the stones of Tikal, sun-warmed and ancient, seemed to hum with memory. By midday, the city shimmered beneath the heat. The white-plastered temples reflected the sunlight with blinding brilliance, and the scent of maize tortillas and roasted cacao drifted through the air. Workers carried stone, women ground corn into masa, and children ran between the narrow alleys of homes clustered beneath the great temples. Life moved with quiet purpose, guided by tradition older than any single man. In the afternoon, when his work paused, Balaam would sometimes climb the steps of Temple 4, the tallest in the city. From its summit, the world stretched endless, jungle in every direction, an ocean of green, broken only by the peaks of other temples, rising like islands. There, the silence was absolute, save for the wind. It was said that the gods could be heard in that silence if one was pure of heart. Whether this was true, Balaam never knew, but he felt the peace of belonging, of being one heartbeat among thousands, each part of a living city that breathed with the earth. As the sun lowered, its light turned golden, painting the stone carvings in hues of amber and blood. Shadows grew long, and the city prepared for night. Fires were lit, and the sound of drums began to echo faintly through the plazas. Slow, steady, like the pulse of the world. It was not a call to celebration, but to remembrance. The day had ended. The gods had been honored. Balance was maintained. When darkness finally fell, the sky above Tikal unfolded in a vast canopy of stars. The Milky Way arched overhead like a river of light, the celestial reflection of the underworld. The priests studied its path, marking the movement of Venus, whose brilliance governed war and kingship. To them, the heavens were not distant mysteries, but the mirror of their own world. Everything that happened in the sky had meaning below. Balaam lay on the cool limestone outside his home, listening to the sounds of the night, the insects, the distant hoot of an owl, the whisper of wind through the palms. The air smelled of earth and smoke and ancient time. He thought of the sun that would rise again, the temples that would endure, and the gods who watched from beyond sight. The city was eternal, or so it seemed. In that quiet, beneath the stars, Tikal dreamed. The morning after the ceremony of offering, Balaam began his work before the sun reached its highest climb. The air was still cool, heavy with the scent of damp earth and flowering vines that crept along the edges of the limestone walls. In his courtyard lay the tools of his craft, chisels of obsidian and flint, wooden mallets worn smooth from years of touch, and a slab of limestone newly brought from the quarries beyond the city's edge. Every mark he would make upon that stone was a conversation with time itself. Tikal's builders were more than laborers. They were custodians of meaning. Each block, each carving, was placed according to patterns that reflected the cycles of creation recorded in the codices. The artisans understood the sacred geometry of the universe, the 4 directions, the 13 layers of heaven, and the 9 levels of the underworld. Their city was a living map of the cosmos, and to shape its stones was to shape the very order of existence. Balaam's task that season was to carve a series of reliefs depicting the maize god Hunhunupu, patron of renewal and abundance. The maize god was central to all life among the Maya. He represented not only sustenance, but resurrection, for maize died each year in the dry season, only to rise again with the rains. To carve his image was to remind the people that life, death, and rebirth were not separate things, but movements in the same eternal dance. He knelt beside the limestone and began to work. Each strike of his chisel sent small clouds of white dust into the air, glittering like ash in the sunlight. The rhythm was steady, patient, and precise, a heartbeat in stone. He carved not from imagination, but from memory, guided by symbols passed down through generations. The maze god's face took shape slowly, long and serene, with closed eyes and a crown of corn silk flowing upward like rays of light. Around Balaam, the sounds of the city rose and fell in a quiet harmony. The distant echo of drums from the temple plazas mixed with the low murmur of traders setting up stalls, the laughter of children, and the soft cooing of pigeons nesting in the temple niches. Tikal was never silent, yet its sounds were never harsh. It breathed with the rhythm of countless lives bound to the same purpose, to maintain balance, to sustain the sacred order. In the midday heat, Balaam paused his work. The light struck the city with a blinding intensity, turning every wall to gold. He moved into the shade of his home, where his mother prepared food, ground maize mixed with cacao and honey. The Maya did not eat for pleasure, but for sustenance and gratitude. Each meal was an offering, and before he ate, Balaam traced a symbol in the air, a simple spiral that represented the breath of life. After resting, he returned to his work. The limestone beneath his hands seemed to pulse with hidden life. The Maya believed that all things, stone, water, wind, possessed spirit, and that the carver's duty was to awaken it. The face of the maze god looked back at him now, emerging fully from the rock, as though the stone itself remembered. There was satisfaction in that moment, not of pride, but of completion. What had once been silent had found its form. Beyond his courtyard, the workers of Tikal toiled in the great plazas. Teams of men carried massive stones along ramps of packed earth, guided by overseers chanting the count of the calendar days. Women tended fires, prepared lime for plaster, and shaped clay vessels for the next ceremonies. The smell of burning copal drifted constantly through the air, a reminder that every act, no matter how ordinary, was part of the sacred cycle. The priests observed the work from the upper terraces. Their duty was to ensure that every structure aligned with the heavens, for the stars were the language of the gods. They used sighting stones to mark the positions of Venus and the Pleiades, ensuring that each new temple would rise in harmony with celestial order. To them, the city was a reflection of the cosmos, a stone mirror of eternity. Balaam admired the priest's knowledge, though his own path lay in the earth. He knew little of the sacred numbers or the calculations that guided the planting of maize and the timing of rituals, yet he felt them deeply in his bones. The cycles of rain and drought, the growth and decay of crops, the life and death of kings, all followed the same invisible pattern. His hands, rough and calloused, carried the memory of that pattern in every movement. When evening came, the heat faded, and the air grew heavy with mist rising from the jungle. The last rays of the sun touched the top of Temple 1, turning its peak crimson. The city glowed faintly in the dimming light, its temples and palaces standing like sacred mountains above the forest. To the west, flocks of birds crossed the horizon, returning to their nests in the ceiba trees, the trees that bridged heaven, earth, and the underworld. Balaam cleaned his tools carefully, placing them in a bundle of woven palm leaves. He ran his fingers along the carved surface of the maze god one last time. The stone was cool now, almost alive under his touch. Tomorrow he would begin another relief, perhaps of Chalk, the rainbringer, whose tears nourished the fields. But for now, he rested in the knowledge that he had added one more voice to the chorus of his city. As night descended, fires flickered across the plazas, casting long shadows on the walls. The smell of cooking maize and resin drifted through the streets. The people of Tikal gathered quietly to eat, to speak prayers, and to watch the stars emerge. Above them, the constellation of the turtle, the symbol of the earth's creation, shone brightly. To the Maya, it was the place where the first maize sprouted, the birthplace of life itself. Balaam watched the stars, and felt a stillness settle within him. The day's work had ended, but its meaning continued beyond his sight. Every carving, every ritual, every offering was a way of speaking to the gods in a language older than words. The city of Tikal, with its temples and causeways, was not built merely of stone and labor, but of faith, the quiet, unbroken faith that bound the people to the cosmos. He lay down on his mat as the sounds of the jungle grew louder, the cries of night birds, the hum of insects, the distant roar of a jaguar. To the Maya, the jaguar was the guardian of the underworld, the one who walked between light and darkness. It was both feared and revered, a reminder that death was not an end, but a continuation of the same eternal circle. The sound comforted Balaam, as it had comforted his ancestors before him. Before sleep took him, he looked once more toward the temples silhouetted against the sky. Their outlines were sharp, unmoving, and eternal. Beneath them the people of Tikal dreamed the same dream, of balance, of continuity, of a world where gods and men were bound by the same breath. The jungle whispered softly around them, ancient and alive, as if listening. And in the heart of that vast, breathing world, the hands of a young stone carver rested, knowing that tomorrow the sun would rise again over the sacred city, and the rhythm of life would begin anew. Time, for the Maya, was not a straight line, but a living circle, infinite and breathing. The people of Tikal lived by its rhythm, as surely as they breathed the humid air of the jungle. Every sunrise, every rainfall, every birth and death were part of that great wheel turning endlessly between gods and men. The sacred calendar, known as the Tzolk'in, was its heart, a pulse that guided the city's life from the smallest task to the grandest ceremony. Balaam did not fully understand the mysteries of the calendar, though he felt its presence in all things. The priests who served as Akinab, keepers of the days, were chosen from childhood for their quiet minds and patient hearts. They were trained to read the sky, to listen to the whispers of the stars, and to interpret the patterns of time woven into the heavens. To them, each day carried a sacred energy, born from the union of number and symbol. It was said that time itself was alive, and that every person's fate flowed from the moment of their birth within the calendar's cycle. The Tzolk'in consisted of 260 days, a sacred count older than memory. 13 numbers combined with 20 day signs, each linked to forces of nature and the gods that ruled them. There was Ik, the breath of wind, Kan, the seed, Itz, the jaguar, and Ajal, the lord of the sun. Each combination had meaning, shaping the destiny of those born under it. The priests recorded these patterns not in words, but in images painted on bark paper codices, their colors vivid and precise, red for fire, blue for water, yellow for maize, and black for death. In the heart of Tikal, the observatories stood silent and watchful. One of them, known today as the Lost World Pyramid, had been built long before Balaam's time, aligned perfectly with the rising of the sun on solstices and equinoxes. From its summit, the priests could mark the path of Venus, whose brilliance governed the rise and fall of kings. The people believed that when Venus appeared as the morning star, wars would begin, and when it vanished, peace would return. To live within such cycles was not to be trapped, but to find harmony in inevitability. Every 20 years, a great ceremony marked the completion of a Ketun, a unit of time sacred to the Maya. On that day, the people gathered before the temples, bringing offerings of maize, cacao, feathers, and obsidian. Fires were lit on the high terraces, and smoke rose like pillars toward the heavens. The king, the Ajau of Tikal, would appear before his people, wearing the headdress of the serpent, symbol of wisdom and renewal. His presence was not merely royal, but divine, for he was the living bridge between earth and sky. Balaam had witnessed such a ceremony once when he was a child. He remembered the stillness that fell over the crowd as the drums began to beat, slow, deep, and resonant, echoing through the limestone walls. The priests chanted in the ancient tongue, their words flowing like the movement of rivers. Offerings were placed upon stone altars, and blood from the royal line was offered to the gods. To the Maya, blood was not death, but nourishment, the sacred essence that connected all living things. It was given freely to sustain the cycle of creation. Now, as an adult, Balaam understood that these ceremonies were not mere spectacle, but necessity. The priests read the calendar to know when to plant, when to harvest, and when to call upon the gods for rain. Even the carving of stone followed its rhythm. Certain days were auspicious for beginning new works, while others were meant for rest and reflection. To ignore the calendar was to invite imbalance, and imbalance meant the slow unraveling of the world. At dawn, the Akinab gathered upon the temples to greet the sun. Their faces were painted with red ochre, symbol of life, and their hair bound with woven cloth, the color of the sky. They carried staffs carved with serpent motifs, representing wisdom and transformation. As the first light broke over the horizon, they raised their arms in silence. There were no words, only the breath of wind moving through the ceiba trees, the sacred tree of life, whose roots touched the underworld and whose branches reached the stars. In the plaza below, the people knelt. Balaam watched from a distance, his heart steady, his breath slow. He did not think of gods as beings apart from men, but as the deep order that held all things together. When the priests cast maize grains upon the ground and read their patterns, he saw not superstition, but an ancient understanding, a conversation with the earth itself. The gods, he thought, were listening, and perhaps always had been. As the ceremony ended, the city returned to its rhythm. The calendar had turned one more day, one more pulse in the endless cycle. Traders from distant cities, Calakmul, Karakol, Kopan, moved through the causeways bearing salt, jade, feathers, and obsidian. Messengers carried news written in glyphs upon bark paper scrolls. Every action, every decision, was guided by the sacred count. Even kings waited for the right day to make war or to wed. To act outside the rhythm was to risk the anger of the gods. In the workshops, Balaam and other artisans carved new stelae, tall stone monuments bearing the likeness of kings and the record of time. The glyphs they carved were not mere words but living symbols, each curve and line holding meaning deeper than speech. The priests dictated the dates, and the artisans inscribed them into eternity. The stone remembered what men forgot. Through such works, the city's history became immortal. As the sun began to set, the priests again climbed the temples, marking the fading light with incense and prayer. The sky burned orange and crimson, and the first stars appeared above the horizon. The day's count was ending, and another would soon be born. Time, to the Maya, never vanished. It transformed. The dead became ancestors, the past became prophecy, and the present was only a moment between the two. That night, Balaam lay awake, listening to the faint sound of the drums from the distant plaza. He thought of the priests and their endless watch over the heavens, of the intricate dance between man and God, order and chaos. In the soft darkness, he felt the pulse of the world, steady, eternal, unbroken. He did not need to understand the numbers or the stars to feel their truth. Time was a living thing, and he was part of its breath. Above Tikal, the Milky Way shimmered, the path of souls across the sky. The priest said it was the great serpent, the bridge between worlds. To Balaam, it was the reminder that nothing ever truly ended. The cycle continued, silent and sure, as the sacred calendar turned once more beneath the gaze of the eternal sun. The rains had not yet come to Tikal. The dry season lingered longer than expected, and the air carried the taste of dust. The reservoirs carved into the limestone had begun to shrink, their mirrored surfaces broken by the wind. The maize plants in the nearby fields stood still, their leaves curled inward in silent thirst. In a land without rivers, water was the breath of the gods, invisible, precious, and sometimes withheld. The people of Tikal turned their eyes toward Chak, the god of rain. His image appeared everywhere, on temple walls, in clay vessels, in the painted murals that glowed in the half-light of the sanctuaries. His face was marked by a long curling nose, the sign of clouds and storms, and his eyes were round like drops of water. To call upon Chak was to plead for life itself, for without him the maize would die and hunger would follow. In times of drought, the priests prepared great ceremonies to awaken the god's favor. For days before the ritual, the city grew quieter. The people fasted, refraining from meat and salt. They swept the plazas clean and adorned the altars with flowers gathered from the forest. The scent of copal resin thickened the air as the offerings were burned in steady rhythm. Everything was done with precision, for even the smallest misstep might disturb the balance between the human and the divine. Balaam watched as preparations unfolded near the base of Temple 4, the great pyramid that pierced the sky. His role was to carve the sacred vessels used in the offering, bowls of limestone and clay adorned with images of serpents, clouds, and water symbols. He worked with careful hands, knowing that each stroke carried meaning. When he shaped the rain god's likeness, he did not think of myth, but of memory. The rain had shaped his people since the beginning. It was their oldest ancestor. The priests who led the ceremony wore cloaks dyed in deep blue, the color of storms. Their headdresses were adorned with feathers from the quetzal, shimmering green like the canopy of the jungle. Each carried a staff carved with lightning bolts, the weapon of Chak. At the appointed hour, they ascended the temple stairs, moving with slow, deliberate steps, their bare feet whispering against the stone. The people gathered below in silence. No one spoke, for this was not a time for words. The city seemed to hold its breath. The drums began, deep and slow, echoing through the plazas like thunder over distant hills. Conch shells sounded in long, mournful tones. Smoke rose from the altars, twisting upward like clouds. The priests chanted, their voices blending into the sound of wind and drums, calling upon Chak to awaken, to open the sky. In the ceremony center stood the king, the divine Aha. His lineage, it was said, descended from the gods of the sun and maize. His duty was to sustain the balance through offering, not as ruler alone, but as the heart of his people. The priests brought forth obsidian blades, their edges black and gleaming. The offering of blood was sacred, not cruel. It was the gift of life returning to its source. The Maya believed that just as the gods had given their essence to create the world, so must humans return a portion of their own. The king lifted his hand, and the crowd bowed their heads. The priests drew the blade, and crimson drops fell upon the stone altar, mixing with the burning copal. The smoke thickened, carrying the scent of blood and resin skyward. It was said that the gods could smell devotion, as surely as men smelled rain. The drums grew louder, the chants deeper, and for a moment it seemed as if the very air trembled. Far beyond the temples, in the horizon above the jungle, a faint rumble of thunder answered. Balaam stood among the crowd, his eyes fixed on the sky. He felt the first cool breath of wind move across the plaza, stirring the smoke. The people began to murmur, not in fear, but in reverence. The priests raised their arms toward the darkening heavens. Lightning flickered far away, followed by another low roll of thunder. Whether the storm had been born of chance or divine mercy, none questioned. In that moment, belief itself was enough to sustain them. By nightfall, The first drops began to fall. They were slow at first, heavy and scattered, tapping against the stone walls and palm roofs. Then came the steady rhythm, a soft drumming that grew into a chorus. The rain fell upon the temples, upon the fields, upon the faces of the people, who lifted their eyes to the sky. The scent of earth rose sweet and strong. The city of Tikal exhaled as though released from a long-held breath. The priests continued their chants, even as the rain soaked their garments. Torches hissed in the downpour, their flames flickering weakly before being swallowed by darkness. The people did not move. They stood together beneath the storm, feeling the water upon their skin. It was not mere weather, but communion, the world made whole again through sacrifice and faith. When the rain finally eased, pools of water gathered in the courtyards, reflecting the firelight from the temples above. The priests descended, their faces serene, their task complete. The offerings had been accepted. The maize fields would live, and the gods were satisfied. The people dispersed slowly, their footsteps soft in the wet earth. Balaam returned to his home drenched but peaceful. The air smelled clean again, alive. He sat in silence beneath the shelter of his roof, listening to the last drops fall from the leaves. He thought of the carvings he had made, of Chalk's face emerging from the stone. He imagined the god watching, not as a distant ruler, but as part of the same cycle. Earth to rain, rain to maize, maize to life, life to offering, and back again. Outside, the jungle stirred. Frogs sang in the puddles, and the howler monkeys called from the trees. The night was thick with sound and motion, the pulse of renewal. The city that had waited now rested, its faith rewarded. The gods of blood and rain had spoken, and the people had listened. In the quiet that followed, Balaam felt the ancient truth that bound his world together, that life and death were not opposites but companions. The blood spilled upon the stone, the rain falling upon the earth, both served the same purpose, to keep the cycle turning. To the Maya, this was not cruelty, but harmony, a sacred exchange between the seen and the unseen. He lay back, eyes closed, hearing the last drops fall upon the stone of his courtyard. Tomorrow, the sun would rise over Tikal once more, and the work would begin again. The temples would gleam, the maize would grow, and the gods would sleep until they were called again by the voices of their people. And in that endless rhythm, Tikal would continue, balanced between sky and earth, between blood and rain. The night after the rain was heavy with mist. The city of Tikal slept beneath a sky still veiled by clouds, and the air carried the scent of wet earth and smoke. Water dripped from the stone terraces in rhythmic patterns, soft as breathing. The fires in the plazas had burned low, their embers glowing faintly against the darkness. In that quiet, between the last hum of insects and the first whisper of dawn, the city dreamed. Balaam lay awake on his mat, listening to the sound of rainwater trickling from the eaves. The storm had passed, yet the echo of thunder still lingered somewhere beyond the horizon. His body was weary, but his mind was restless. The ceremony of Chalk had stirred something within him. Not fear, but a deep unease, as if he had glimpsed a truth too vast to hold in words. He closed his eyes, and the sound of dripping water carried him into sleep. In his dream, the world was bathed in silver light. He stood in the plaza before the temples, though they seemed taller now, their peaks piercing the clouds. The air shimmered as if alive. The stone carvings upon the walls moved with slow, deliberate grace. Serpents coiling, jaguars stretching, maize sprouting from the mouths of the gods. Time itself seemed to breathe. Before him stood the great ceiba tree, its roots thick as the bodies of serpents, its branches reaching toward the stars. The trunk glowed faintly, carved with glyphs that pulsed like hearts. It was the tree of worlds, its roots touching the underworld, its crown rising into the heavens. Around it, the spirits of the ancestors moved in silence, their forms flickering like smoke. They did not speak, but Balaam understood their presence as clearly as sound. A low growl rose from the shadows. From between the roots of the ceiba emerged a jaguar, black as the void between stars. Its eyes shone golden, burning with an ancient light. It moved with the grace of the gods, silent, effortless, eternal. The air trembled around it, and Balaam felt the weight of its gaze. The jaguar was sacred, the guardian of night, the bridge between life and death. To see it was to stand at the edge of both worlds. The creature circled him slowly, its muscles rippling beneath its dark fur. Where it stepped, the ground shimmered like water, and images rose within the ripples. Faces of kings, temples rising, fields of maize turning to dust, rivers flowing backward into the earth. He saw the city of Tikal as it was and as it would be, its glory, its silence, its inevitable return to the forest. The vision did not frighten him. It filled him with a strange peace, a sense of belonging to something that neither began nor ended. The jaguar stalked before him. Its breath was warm, carrying the scent of earth and rain. In its eyes, Balaam saw the reflection of the sun and the moon together, day and night, bound in a single gaze. Without words, the meaning passed between them. Balance. The same balance that the priests spoke of. The same that governed the turning of the calendar, the growth of maize, the flow of blood and rain. It was the pulse of existence itself. The jaguar lowered its head, touching its forehead to Balaam's chest. A sudden warmth spread through him, deep and steady, like the heartbeat of the earth. He felt the weight of generations in that touch. His ancestors, the builders and carvers, the kings and farmers, all joined in a single current of life. He understood then that the gods did not live above or beyond, but within. Every man, every stone, every drop of water carried their essence. When he looked again, the jaguar was gone. The ceiba tree glowed brighter, its branches reaching higher until they vanished into the stars. The air was filled with the distant sound of drums, slow and ancient, echoing from somewhere beyond the sky. The light grew stronger, dissolving the world around him until there was nothing left but the sound, steady, rhythmic, eternal. He awoke just before dawn. The air was cool, the mist pale and low to the ground. Outside, the jungle murmured softly, alive with the renewed breath of rain. Balaam sat up slowly, his heart still beating with the echo of the dream. The memory of the jaguar lingered, not as fear, but as a quiet certainty. He rose and stepped outside into the damp courtyard. The city was still asleep. The temples loomed in the fading darkness, their tops just catching the faintest hint of morning light. Water pooled in the cracks of the stone, reflecting the sky like fragments of mirrors. From somewhere far off came the first cry of a bird greeting the day. Balaam stood barefoot upon the wet ground, feeling the earth's pulse beneath him. The dream had not left him. It had become part of him. He walked toward the edge of the plaza, where the first rays of the sun broke through the mist. The light touched the stones, turning them gold. For a moment, the entire city seemed to awaken, not with noise, but with breath, as if the gods themselves exhaled. The cycle continued, as it always had. The rain had come, the dawn had returned, and life began anew. Balaam lifted his hands toward the sun, not in prayer, but in acknowledgement. He thought of the jaguar, the ceiba, the endless rhythm of time. Everything was connected. The gods, the people, the stones, the rain. He understood now what his father had once told him without words, that to carve stone was not to create, but to reveal what already existed. The world was alive, and he was part of its dream. As the sun rose fully, the mist dissolved, revealing the green canopy of the jungle stretching endlessly beyond the city walls. The temples stood bright and silent, their shadows sharp upon the earth. The fires in the plazas were rekindled, and the sound of life returned. Footsteps, voices, the grinding of maize. The day began as all days did, but for Balaam, it felt different, deeper, as though he had seen beneath the surface of the world. That night, he would sleep again beneath the stars, and perhaps the jaguar would return. But even if it did not, its presence would remain, in the sound of rain, in the warmth of the sun, in the heartbeat of the city. The gods of the Maya did not vanish. They lingered in every breath of wind and every flicker of light. Tikal endured, balanced between heaven and earth, its people living within the eternal circle of time. And so the dawn came again, golden and silent, over the sacred city of stone. The city of Tikal rose from the jungle like the bones of the earth made visible. Its temples reached upward through the mist, their summits piercing the clouds, their stairways angled toward the path of the sun. To the people who built them, these were not monuments of power but bridges between worlds, places where the breath of men could touch the breath of the gods. The builders of these temples were known not merely as workers, but as keepers of balance, artisans who translated the movements of the heavens into the language of stone. Each block that formed the pyramids of Tikal was cut from the limestone that lay beneath the forest. The stone was soft when first quarried, easy to shape, but it hardened over time, enduring for centuries beneath the sun and rain. Men carried the blocks upon wooden frames or dragged them across earthen ramps with ropes woven from vines. There were no beasts of burden, no metal tools, no wheels, only strength, patience, and faith. The process was slow, yet to the Maya, speed was not a virtue. The gods measured time in cycles, not hours. The architects, or Itzatub, studied both the earth and the sky before laying the foundation of any temple. They observed the rising and setting of the sun, the crossings of Venus, and the pattern of shadows that marked each solstice. With obsidian rods and cords of woven fiber, they measured alignments invisible to ordinary eyes. The placement of each structure was chosen so that on sacred days, the light of dawn would fall perfectly upon the altar within. In this way, the city became a vast calendar, recording the harmony of heaven and earth in its very stones. Balaam, though a carver and not an architect, often watched the builders at work. He admired their quiet discipline, their reverence for both precision and beauty. The master builders moved through the construction sites with deliberate calm, their hands coated with white dust, their eyes narrowed against the glare of the sun. They spoke little, for every gesture was part of the ritual. To raise a temple was to repeat the act of creation itself, the forming of order from chaos, the lifting of the world from the primeval waters. The foundation stones were placed first, aligned with the cardinal directions. To the Maya, these directions were sacred. East was the realm of the rising sun and new life. West, the path of death and renewal. North, the domain of ancestors. And south, the realm of fertility and growth. Each side of a temple carried offerings buried beneath it. Jade beads for the east, obsidian blades for the west, shells for the north, and maize kernels for the south. These offerings were not decoration but invocation, calling upon the powers that governed creation. Once the foundation was blessed, the builders began to raise the terraces. Layer by layer, they lifted the temple toward the heavens, each step a measure of devotion. The walls were coated in lime plaster, white and smooth as bone. When sunlight struck them, the temples blazed with light, visible for miles through the jungle canopy. From a distance, they appeared not as man-made structures, but as mountains of the gods, eternal and immovable. The construction was guided by chance and numbers. The Maya believed that the universe was composed of sacred mathematics, that the gods themselves spoke through measure and proportion. The numbers 13 and 20 held particular power, echoing the cycles of the heavens and the human body. Every staircase, platform, and chamber was built according to these hidden ratios. To the untrained eye, the temples were grand. To those who understood, they were perfect. As the sun reached its zenith, the builders paused in their work. The heat pressed down like a living weight, and the sound of the jungle grew louder, the drone of insects, the cry of distant birds. The men rested in the shade, their bodies coated in dust that glittered faintly in the light. They drank water from clay jars, the liquid cool and bitter with limestone. For a moment, the noise of the city faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of breathing, the same rhythm that guided their work, the rhythm of the god's own pulse. In the afternoons, the priests would climb the half-finished stairways to observe the progress. They carried small bowls of incense and sprinkled maize upon the stones. Their prayers were not commands but acknowledgments, affirmations that the work remained in harmony with the heavens. They reminded the builders that the temple was not for men but for the divine, that each stone placed without reverence could disturb the balance of the world. The builders bowed their heads, not in submission, but in respect for the order they served. As dusk approached, the jungle began to reclaim its sounds. The howler monkeys roared from the treetops, their cries echoing like the voices of the underworld. Bats emerged from the shadows, sweeping through the cooling air. The workers gathered their tools and descended from the scaffolds, their bodies weary, but their spirits calm. The day's work was complete, and the temple had risen one layer closer to the sky. Balaam watched from a distance as the last light of the sun struck the upper stones, turning them gold. He felt the quiet pride that came not from ownership, but from belonging to a people who built not for glory, but for eternity. The temples would outlast them all. They would stand when the jungle had reclaimed the houses, when names had been forgotten, when the language of men had changed. The gods would still recognize the pattern in the stone. That night, as darkness fell, the stars appeared one by one, bright and sharp against the black sky. The builders lay upon the ground, looking upward. To them, the stars were not distant fires, but ancestors. Spirits watching, guiding, and remembering. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a great white road, the path by which souls traveled between worlds. In its reflection, they saw their temples, their city, their purpose. And so, beneath that vast sky, the builders of Tikal slept. Tomorrow they would rise again, to lift more stone, to carve more symbols, to give shape to the unseen order of the cosmos. Their work was endless, but so was the meaning behind it. In their hands, the earth became heaven, and heaven found its reflection in the earth. To the Maya, numbers were more than tools of calculation. They were living symbols, reflections of divine order. Every count, every cycle, every alignment carried meaning that extended far beyond mere measure. The universe itself was a vast equation, and through understanding its balance, the Maya sought to maintain harmony between gods and men. They believed that the laws governing the movement of the stars also governed the growth of maize, the rhythm of breath, and the beating of the human heart. All things moved according to number, and number was sacred. In the calm of morning, when mist still lingered above the plazas, the mathematicians of Tikal gathered near the observatory. They sat upon low stone benches, their tablets of bark paper spread before them, and traced patterns of dots and bars with charcoal. Each symbol was both simple and infinite. A single dot for 1, a bar for 5, the empty shell for 0. The concept of nothingness, which others feared, was to the Maya a symbol of creation, the void from which all life emerged. They treated 0 not as absence, but as potential, the silence before sound, the breath before word. Their Vigesimal system, built upon the count of 20, reflected the human form, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and thus tied man directly to the cosmos. With it, they measured not only the passing of days, but but the cycles of the gods themselves. The mathematicians kept careful records of celestial events, marking eclipses, solstices, and conjunctions with precision that would astonish even distant ages. They charted the movements of Venus, the morning star, whose brilliance guided both farmers and kings. To them, Venus was not merely a point of light, but a messenger of change, heralding times of war and peace. The builders consulted these calculations before each new project. The temples of Tikal were not placed by chance, but by alignment with the heavens. On specific days, when the sun reached a precise point in its annual journey, its rays would fall through narrow openings or across carved staircases, illuminating symbols that lay hidden the rest of the year. These moments were not accidents. They were orchestrations of divine geometry. The city itself became a living calendar, its architecture speaking in the language of light and shadow. The priests who interpreted these alignments were known as Ajkin, those of the sun. They observed the world with both spiritual and mathematical eyes, for to them there was no difference between the sacred and the scientific. When they calculated the time of harvest, they did so through ritual. When they performed ritual, it was through calculation. Every offering, every festival, every carving upon a temple wall was part of a pattern stretching across centuries. At the center of this knowledge lay the calendar, a system of cycles interlocking like the gears of an unseen machine. The Tzolk'in, the sacred calendar of 260 days, governed ritual life. The Hab, the solar calendar of 365 days, governed the seasons and the movements of the sun. Together they formed the calendar round, a cycle that repeated every 52 years, marking the completion of cosmic harmony. Beyond these cycles, the long count extended into vast stretches of time, measuring not lifetimes, but epochs. It was through the long count that the Maya situated themselves within eternity, tracing their origins to the dawn of creation. Balaam had heard the priests speak of these cycles, though he understood only fragments of their meaning. Still, he felt their truth in the rhythm of his days, in the rising and setting of the sun, in the planting and harvesting of maize, in the turning of the moon. Even the stones he carved seemed to carry the same pulse, as if time itself was hidden within their grain. The gods had built the world through measure, and in following that measure, man participated in creation anew. Within the observatory, narrow windows cut through the stone, aligned with the movements of the heavens. On certain nights, a star would appear precisely in the center of one, shining down upon a carved glyph or a bowl of water that reflected its light. The priests recorded these moments carefully, marking them with incense and quiet reverence. They believed that such alignments were the breath of the gods made visible, proof that order still prevailed in the world. When the stars failed to appear where expected, fear stirred, for it meant imbalance, a disturbance in the sacred count. The mathematics of the gods were not confined to temples or observatories. They shaped every aspect of Mayan life. Farmers measured the spacing of their maize according to celestial proportions. Artisans carved patterns based on repeating cycles. Weavers arranged colors and knots in correspondence with lunar phases. Even music followed mathematical law, the rhythm of drums mirroring the pattern of days within the sacred calendar. To live outside these measures was to live outside harmony. In Tikal, as in all great cities of the Maya, the concept of time was not linear but cyclical. The people did not think of history as a line from past to future, but as a circle that turned endlessly. The end of one cycle was merely the beginning of another, just as the setting sun was followed by its rise. This understanding gave their civilization a calm endurance. Empires might fall, kings might vanish, but time itself continued, infinite and renewing. Through number and ritual, the Maya sought not to escape this cycle, but to align themselves with it. At dusk, the mathematicians of Tikal gathered their papers and stored them within stone chambers, safe from moisture and insects. They washed their hands in water scented with crushed leaves, cleansing themselves after a day of communion with the infinite. As the sky darkened, they looked upward to see Venus gleaming low above the horizon, bright and unwavering. Its light was a reminder that even amidst uncertainty, order remained. The gods still counted, and so did men. Night fell upon the city, and the stars wheeled silently overhead, each one marking its appointed place in the celestial ledger. From the highest temple, the patterns of light and shadow could be seen reflected upon the earth, as though the heavens themselves had descended to rest upon Tikal. The people slept within this cosmic symmetry, unaware that their dreams too followed hidden cycles. Above them, the universe turned, precise and eternal, a perfect equation, written not in ink or stone, but in the endless breath of time. The labor of the builders was both sacred and ceaseless. From the first blush of dawn until the fading of the light, the sound of stone upon stone filled the air of Tikal, a rhythm older than memory, echoing through the forest like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The people who shaped these stones did not think of themselves as craftsmen in the way later ages would understand the word. They were not merely workers, but participants in a divine process. Each movement of the chisel a prayer, each stroke of the hammer a reaffirmation of life's order. They began before sunrise, while the jungle still lay wrapped in shadow. The air was cool then, and the mists hung low among the roots of the ceiba trees. Men carried their tools in woven baskets, stone hammers, chisels of obsidian, and shells polished to sharp edges. They moved in silence, guided by habit and the slow light that crept between the trees. When they reached the quarries, they offered maize and copal incense before beginning their work, a small gesture of gratitude to the gods who had placed the limestone within the earth. The quarry was a living wound in the jungle. Its walls gleamed pale beneath the first rays of the sun, and the scent of wet stone filled the air. The workers struck rhythmically, loosening great slabs from the earth with levers of wood. Each impact rang out like a muted bell, blending with the distant cries of birds. Sweat and dust mingled upon their skin, forming a thin crust of white. Yet no one complained. The act of shaping stone was considered a form of worship, an offering of strength in exchange for divine endurance. To carve the bones of the world was to honor the gods who had first given it form. Once freed, the stones were loaded onto wooden frames and dragged toward the city. The paths were slick from the morning dew, and the air carried the heavy scent of vegetation and clay. Along the way, women and children from nearby dwellings brought water in clay jars. They spoke little, but their presence reminded the workers that they labored not only for the gods, but for the living, for families, for harvests, for the unbroken rhythm of their world. The builders' hands were raw and calloused, yet within their roughness lay devotion. Their faith was not spoken, it was built. By midday, the stones reached the construction site. There, the air shimmered with heat, and the great temples of Tikal rose like pale cliffs above the jungle canopy. The workers took their places along the scaffolds, some lifting, some smoothing, others carving. The stone surfaces were alive with intricate designs, serpents coiled in endless loops, faces of gods gazing outward, symbols that recorded time and creation. The carvers worked slowly, their movements deliberate. They believed that a careless cut could awaken discord within the stone, disturbing the balance of its spirit. Among them were elders who had shaped temples since their youth. Their arms were sinewed and darkened by the sun, their eyes sharp despite age. They carried the memory of techniques passed down through generations, how to judge the grain of limestone, how to feel its weight and know where it would break cleanly. To them, stone was not dead matter, but something breathing, patient, and ancient. They treated it with the respect one would show to a living being. When they finished the carving, they would blow upon it gently, releasing any lingering imperfections into the wind. The afternoons were the hardest. The sun burned high, and the glare from the white stone was blinding. The air quivered with heat, and even the insects fell silent. The workers' shadows shortened, swallowed by the brightness of day, yet still they labored, sustained by faith and rhythm. They believed that endurance itself was a form of offering, a way of imitating the patience of the gods, who shaped the world not in days, but in ages. In their exhaustion, they found a kind of peace, the stillness that comes from losing oneself within a greater purpose. Occasionally, the priests would appear at the site, their robes marked with ochre and soot. They sprinkled water mixed with crushed herbs upon the stones, cooling them and consecrating them anew. Smoke rose into the still air, carrying with it the scent of pine resin and salt. The builders would pause, bowing their heads. It was not submission, but recognition, an acknowledgement that their work, however material, was intertwined with the invisible. The boundary between sacred and mundane did not exist here. Every gesture, every grain of dust was part of the same divine pattern. As the sun dipped lower, the air cooled, and shadows stretched long across the plaza. The workers descended from the scaffolds, their bodies covered in dust that glowed faintly in the twilight. They washed in the nearby pools, the water turning pale with the residue of limestone. Some returned to their homes. Others lingered, sitting in silence to watch the fading light upon the temples. In those quiet moments, they could feel the breath of their ancestors in the wind, the unseen hands that had built before them and would build again after they were gone. Balaam often joined them at day's end, though his role was that of carver rather than builder. He found comfort in their company, in the shared stillness that followed labor. He watched the play of light across the unfinished temple walls, imagining how they would look when complete, white as bone, alive with glyphs that sang of gods and kings. He felt the pulse of the city beneath him, deep and steady. Each stone seemed to hold a fragment of that rhythm, a heartbeat frozen within lime. When night came, torches flickered along the temple base, their flames trembling in the breeze. The builders rested upon mats woven from palm fiber, their tools beside them like extensions of their hands. The sounds of the jungle returned, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of unseen creatures, the distant call of night birds. Above, the stars burned bright, reflected faintly upon the smooth faces of the stone. It was said that the gods looked down upon the work of men and recognized themselves within it. As sleep descended upon the city, the half-finished temples stood silent and immense, their forms merging with the darkness. The stones seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with the cool night air. The builders dreamed of light and water, of rain falling upon the steps, of the gods descending in quiet splendor. Their work would continue tomorrow, and the next day, and for generations beyond. The temples would rise, not through conquest or command, but through faith. Faith carried in hands of stone and hearts of endurance. For in Tikal, faith was not spoken, it was built. The limestone of Tikal was more than building material. It was the body of the earth itself, a gift and a challenge from the gods. The Maya did not see stone as inert or lifeless. It held memory, spirit, and the weight of eternity. To quarry, shape, and place it was to participate in the ongoing creation of the world. Every temple, every plaza, every stela carved with glyphs became a conduit through which the living city breathed alongside the ancestors and deities. The quarries lay beyond the outer causeways, in areas where the jungle thinned and the limestone bedrock rose like pale hills. Here, the earth was exposed, ridged with veins of minerals, and pocked with fissures. Workers approached the stone with reverence, striking first with small chisels to hear its response. A crack that ran too deep was avoided. A grain too brittle was left behind. Each slab was chosen not only for size, but for integrity. For a stone that would last through seasons of sun and downpours was considered more sacred. The process was slow, deliberate, guided by centuries of knowledge passed orally from master to apprentice. Water was essential in this work. The workers sprinkled it upon the stone to reduce dust and to feel its resistance. Wet stone revealed its inner layers, and the artisans learned to read these patterns as one might read the veins of a leaf. Limestone, when touched by water, seemed to breathe, expanding slightly and revealing its texture. The Maya believed that the spirit of the earth resided within each block. To ignore its nature was to risk angering the forces that sustained life, the spirits of land, rain, and sky. After quarrying, the stones were transported on wooden sledges, sometimes across carefully laid paths, lubricated with water or plant sap to reduce friction. Teams of men pulled in rhythm, their chants blending with the sound of splintering wood and dragging stone. At each step, the workers paid attention to the weight of the earth beneath their feet, the way the stones responded to pressure, and the slope of the ground. The journey was both physical and spiritual. To carry a stone was to carry a fragment of the world, to honor the gift of creation in motion. Within the city, the placement of each stone followed cosmic logic. Foundations aligned with the cardinal directions anchored the temples in the balance of the universe. Terraces rose in precise increments, measured not only for structural stability, but for sacred proportion. A staircase leading to a temple's summit was more than functional. Each step was a unit of ritual, a means for humans to ascend toward the divine. The earth and stone were inseparable in this design, reflecting the Maya belief that the heavens could touch the ground only through careful harmony with the material world. The artisans also considered the longevity of water in their planning. Reservoirs, channels, and cisterns were integrated into the layout of the city, gathering the seasonal rains for use during the dry months. Stone basins and carved drains allowed the water to flow in controlled patterns, echoing the cycles observed in the heavens. In this way, the architecture itself became a living instrument, channeling the earth's breath, sustaining life, and reflecting divine order. Every carved glyph and decorative motif was chosen with an eye to this connection. Serpents, the carriers of water, coiled around staircases. Maize stalks climbed walls. Jaguars crouched near entrances. These were not mere symbols, but embodiments of forces that flowed through the city, reminders that life was sustained by cycles of growth, death, and renewal. Stone became a storyteller, conveying truths that could not be expressed in spoken words. The laborers themselves felt these connections deeply. They observed the responses of the stone to their touch, the flow of air across the terraces, the shimmer of sunlight reflecting off wet surfaces. Each moment of their work was a dialogue with the world. Mist rising from the jungle was read as a sign of fertility. A crack in a stone was interpreted as a warning. Their faith was embedded in the rhythm of daily toil, their devotion recorded in the very walls of the temples. At dusk, the city seemed to exhale. The heat faded, the shadows lengthened, and the smooth surfaces of the stone caught the fading light. Glowing faintly, pools of rainwater reflected the temples above, mirroring stars that were beginning to appear in the sky. The people of Tikal moved quietly, washing themselves, tending fires, preparing offerings. The stone of the city, wet and cool from the evening dew, seemed to pulse faintly, a memory of the day's labor and a promise of tomorrow's renewal. Balaam often lingered after work, running his hands along the carved reliefs. The stone, cool under his fingertips, felt almost alive. He traced the flowing lines of serpents and maize, noting the precision of the curves and angles. Each mark had a purpose. Each figure was a vessel of meaning. He understood, without thinking in words, that to shape the stone was to engage with the earth itself, to respect its weight and texture, and to honor the cycles of the world that stretched far beyond human life. The jungle surrounding Tikal listened quietly to these labors. At night, the ceiba trees whispered in the wind, the frogs crooned in low, rhythmic patterns, and the jaguars prowled silently, guardians of the unseen world. Within this soundscape, the city's stone buildings rose like pale witnesses, recording the devotion of countless generations. They bore the mark of human hands, but also the memory of the earth, preserving in their form the breath and spirit of the world. Sleep came slowly, beneath the veil of stars and mist. The builders rested, yet even in rest, their work continued in the memory of stone. Each temple, each altar, each carved glyph would endure, a testament to the union of human effort and the living earth. In the quiet night, the city seemed to breathe as one organism, the pulse of life and stone, of water and air, moving together in harmony. The Maya knew that the earth was not merely a stage for human activity, but an active participant in life. Through careful attention, reverence, and understanding, they shaped it without breaking it. The stone absorbed their faith, and in turn, the city became a living expression of balance, a reflection of the divine order in the material world. Every block placed, every wall raised, was a proof that humans and earth could exist in harmony, their breaths mingling across centuries of sun and rain. In Tikal, light was as sacred as stone. The architects of the city understood that the sun and moon were not distant objects, but forces that spoke through illumination. Every terrace, every staircase, every carved niche was designed to capture or redirect light, to mark sacred time, and to connect the people to the cycles of the cosmos. Shadows were not absence, but presence, companions to the brilliance of the day, shaping meaning as powerfully as the stone itself. At dawn, the first rays of sunlight struck the temples in precise angles, illuminating altars hidden deep within inner chambers. The effect was both practical and spiritual. For the priests, the sudden brightness signaled the correct moment for offerings. For the people, it was a visual confirmation that the gods were awake and attentive. Each year, on solstices and equinoxes, these alignments became more elaborate, with light traveling along staircases, reflecting off polished surfaces, and falling upon glyphs that recorded sacred time. The city became a theater of illumination, a living instrument tuned to the heavens. Balaam observed these phenomena with quiet awe. Though he was a carver and not an astronomer, he felt the language of light in the curve of every glyph he etched, in the placement of every figure he revealed from stone. The bright line of dawn that touched the altar seemed to carry a message. The city was alive, responsive, and in dialogue with the cosmos. Every shadow had its counterpart, every reflection its meaning. Light and darkness were partners, not opposites, each defining the other and sustaining the balance that the Maya so deeply revered. Throughout the day, as the sun arced across the sky, shadows shifted, stretching across terraces and through colonnades. The architects accounted for every angle, every shadow, as carefully as they accounted for the stone itself. There were thresholds where shadow would gather at noon, marking the hours, and open courtyards where sunlight would fall in a golden rectangle, aligning with glyphs that traced the paths of stars and planets. To walk the city was to experience a calendar in motion, each step measured against the eternal rhythms of the heavens. At midday, when the sun stood high, the temples appeared as solid, luminous forms against the canopy of the jungle. Their white plaster reflected light with a brilliance that could be seen for miles. Shadows cut across staircases and terraces, creating geometric patterns that shifted as time passed. The effect was both subtle and precise, a visual reminder that the human world was always in conversation with the divine. Observing these patterns, the priests could predict celestial events, determine auspicious days for planting and harvesting, and choose the correct times for ritual. Even as the day waned, light played upon the city in meaningful ways. Late afternoon shadows stretched long, emphasizing the reliefs on the walls and tracing the outlines of carved serpents, jaguars, and maize stalks. The movement of the sun across the sky turned static images into living ones, as if the stone itself breathed in response to celestial cycles. The city became a theater in which gods and humans met daily, silently, through the interplay of brightness and darkness. At twilight, the last rays of sunlight transformed the stone into gold and amber, and shadows grew deep and quiet. Pools of rainwater collected on terraces and in cisterns reflected this dying light, mirroring the heavens above. Priests walked among them, performing rites to honor both the celestial bodies and the ancestors, acknowledging the passage of time as day gave way to night. For the people of Tikal, these moments of transition were imbued with power. The boundary between worlds seemed thin, the veil between the living and the divine nearly transparent. Stars appeared gradually, first the brightest, then a host of dimmer ones. Constellations were traced not in ink, but in memory, in alignment, and in stone. Observatories on temple summits captured the angles of stars, allowing the Maya to anticipate the movements of Venus, Jupiter, and the moon. These observations were more than curiosity. They were a map of destiny. The architects had placed openings and terraces so that celestial events, eclipses, solstice sunrises, lunar crescents, would interact with the built world. In this way, light connected the city, the cosmos, and human endeavor in a single, continuous web. Beneath this interplay, life in the city moved quietly. Workers descended from scaffolds, children ran along stone causeways, and merchants began to close stalls. All the while, the patterns of light and shadow persisted, indifferent to human presence, yet shaping daily experience. Even in ordinary routines, the Maya felt their existence intertwined with these cycles. They moved in rhythm with the sun, their labor and devotion reflected in the changing illumination upon the temples they had built. For Balaam, the city's response to light was deeply personal. As he carved new glyphs, he imagined the sun catching their edges at the precise moment that would awaken their sacred meaning. The stone, light, and shadow were inseparable, a trinity of creation. Through their harmony, he understood the invisible structures that guided his people. The cycles of life, the flow of time, the silent, patient oversight of the gods. Every day became a ritual of observation and participation, a testament to the skill and faith of the builders. When night finally fell, darkness settled over Tikal like a protective cloak. Shadows merged into one another. Pools reflected distant stars, and the air cooled, carrying the scent of wet stone and forest. The city, though silent, was not dormant. Its temples continued to interact with the heavens, responding to moonlight and starlight, to dew and wind. Even in the absence of sun, the principles of alignment and illumination persisted. A quiet reminder that the Maya understood the cosmos as a continuum, never ceasing, never broken. Balaam lay upon the stone floor of the temple base, looking up through the open sky. He traced constellations with his eyes, following the faint glimmer of planets against the black. In that quiet, he felt the balance of the world, the dance of light and shadow, stone and sky, man and God. Each morning, each sunset, each shift in shadow was a message, a proof that their labor was aligned with the eternal order. The city lived in these moments, breathing with the pulse of light itself. And so, as the night deepened, Tikal remained awake in spirit. a city sculpted by hands of stone and minds of reverence. Light and shadow were not simply phenomena, but teachers, guiding the living to understand their place within the cycles of the universe. Through the careful observation of the heavens, through the precise placement of stones, the Maya had transformed their city into a reflection of the cosmos, a luminous testament to faith, knowledge, and the unbroken rhythm of time. The fields surrounding Tikal stretched in irregular patches between low hills and marshes, nourished by the rain and the fertility of the limestone soil. To the Maya, maize was not merely food. It was the embodiment of life itself. Every kernel carried within it the essence of creation, and to plant it was to participate in the divine act of renewal. Seasons were measured by the growth of maize, and human labor was synchronized with the rhythm of the crop. In the early morning, before the sun had climbed above the canopy, the farmers moved into the fields. They carried simple tools, digging sticks, stone knives, and baskets of prepared seeds. The ground, dark and moist from the previous night's dew, was turned carefully, the soil aerated without excess, as if to honor the spirits residing within it. Each row of maize was drawn with care, in lines both practical and symbolic, echoing patterns observed in the stars and the sacred calendars. The planting was accompanied by silent rituals. Women and men sprinkled water around the first kernels and murmured blessings that were less spoken words than the rhythm of breath, aligning in kenshin with movement. Seeds were placed in the soil according to calculations that tracked the moon's cycles, the rising and setting of Venus, and the positions of the solstices. To disregard these measures was to invite misfortune, drought, disease, or poor harvests. Knowledge of time and celestial motion was as necessary as physical skill. Children followed their parents, learning the methods not through instruction alone, but by observation. They memorized the spacing of plants, the angles of terraces, and the depth of planting. Each kernel dropped into the earth was an object lesson in patience and care, teaching that life required labor, rhythm, and attentiveness. These young apprentices also learned to observe the clouds, feeling the approach of rain in humidity, wind, and temperature, understanding the world as an interconnected system. In the center of the field, small altars were often set. Stones and painted ceramics held offerings of water, maize, and copal resin, each item representing an element of creation. The farmers believed that spirits of the earth, rain, and ancestors were present in these places, observing their work and ensuring fertility. Sacrifice and cultivation were inseparable. The success of the harvest depended on devotion as much as on technique. The field itself was a temple, its rows and mounds aligned with celestial patterns as carefully as the stones of Tikal's pyramids. Irrigation and water management were integral to the planting process. Canals, shallow channels, and reservoirs directed rainwater to the fields, ensuring that the maize would have moisture even in the dry months. The Maya understood the soil's capacity to retain water, the angle of sun exposure, and the slope of each terrace. These practical considerations were imbued with sacred meaning. The flow of water was a reflection of divine cycles, and the farmer's attentiveness ensured that the gifts of the gods were not squandered. As the sun rose higher, the workers moved steadily through the fields. Sweat dampened their clothing, and the earth clung to their hands and feet. The rhythm of digging, planting, and covering the seeds mirrored the cycles observed in the heavens. Time was not measured by hours, but by the progress of the work and the alignment of the sun. Each step, each placement of a seed was a gesture in a cosmic dance, connecting human labor to celestial order. By midday, the maize stood only as rows of small green shoots, yet in them lay the promise of life and sustenance. Farmers paused to rest in shaded groves, drinking water from clay jars. Even in repose, They remained attentive, watching the movement of clouds, listening to the calls of birds, noting the patterns of insects. Observation was as vital as effort, for the unseen forces, spirits of rain, earth, and ancestors, were believed to influence every stage of growth. The cycle of labor extended beyond planting. Weeding, watering, and protection from pests required constant attention. Each action harmonized with the calendars and observations that guided Mayan life. Festivals and rituals punctuated these cycles, marking the times of sowing, first growth, and harvest. Each festival renewed both the soil and the spirit of the people, reminding them that sustenance was a gift and that gratitude was inseparable from survival. Beneath the visible work, the moon played its role. Its phases guided the planting of certain crops, signaling times when energy flowed into the earth or receded. Observations of the night sky were as vital as those of the day. Farmers knew when the crescent would rise, when Venus would appear, and when the constellations shifted in the sky. These celestial markers governed the pace of labor, ensuring that human effort aligned with the rhythms of the universe. As dusk approached, the workers gathered the tools and returned to the village. The sun fell behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the terraces and the newly planted fields. Water collected in low spots, reflecting the last light of day and the rising moon above. The altars at the center of each field glowed faintly with the warmth of evening offerings, their presence reminding the people that the work of planting was both practical and sacred, human and divine. Beneath the night sky, Tikal's fields rested in quiet expectation. Every seed in the soil held potential. Every alignment in the terraces mirrored the stars, and every drop of water and ray of moonlight was a thread in a network that bound humans, gods, and earth together. Life in the city and the surrounding fields was a continuum, a constant interplay between effort and blessing, labor and ritual. Maize was not merely food. It was the measure of time, the embodiment of creation, and the pulse of the city itself. In the silence of the night, as stars wheeled above and the moon cast pale light upon the wet terraces, Balaam walked through the fields. He touched the seedlings gently, feeling the vibration of life beneath the surface of the earth. He thought of the ceremonies performed in the city, the alignment of temples with the heavens, and the same principles reflected in the planting and growth of maize. Both stone and soil were sacred. Both required patience, attention, and reverence. In this understanding lay the essence of Mayan life, a continuous, conscious harmony with the world. As the seasons shifted and the sun traced its long arc across the sky, the maize in Tikal's fields matured, thick and golden under the relentless light. The farmers moved among the stalks with careful steps, their eyes scanning the leaves for signs of ripeness. The harvest was not simply a practical task. It was a ritual, a sacred engagement with the cycles of life that governed both the earth and the heavens. Every cob collected carried the essence of creation, the concentrated vitality of the soil, the blessings of the rain, and the silent witness of the ancestors. When the time of gathering arrived, families worked together in the fields. Men and women bent over the stalks, cutting the cobs with stone knives, while children carried baskets filled with the freshly harvested kernels. The air was thick with the scent of maize, sweet and earthy, mingling with the green of the jungle and the faint smoke from distant hearths. The labor was hard and unending. The act of harvest was infused with a quiet reverence. It was a moment when human effort and divine grace intersected visibly. Before the first kernels were taken, offerings were made. Small altars positioned at the corners of the fields bore maize, water, and copal resin. The farmers poured water onto the soil, asking for continued fertility and protection from pests, drought, or disease. They placed maize cobs in sacred patterns upon the ground, each arrangement aligned with cardinal directions or specific celestial markers. The rituals were precise, reflecting knowledge of the heavens, the earth, and the cycles of life. The harvest was both sustenance and prayer, labor and devotion intertwined. The cutting of maize followed a rhythm that mirrored celestial movements. Workers observed the position of the sun and moon, ensuring that each cob was harvested at an auspicious moment. They measured the alignment of shadows across the terraces, and the rustle of leaves in the wind was interpreted as a sign from the spirits. Even the smallest decisions, such as which row to begin with, were guided by these observances. In this way, the harvest became a continuation of the sacred order, a reaffirmation that human life was harmonized with the larger cycles of the cosmos. The kernels, once stripped from the cobs, were carefully collected in woven baskets. Some were set aside for immediate consumption. Others were stored in granaries or prepared for ritual use. The grains were more than food. They were symbolic of life, prosperity, and continuity. The abundance of the harvest was interpreted as a sign that the gods favored the city and its people. Scarcity, conversely, was seen as a signal for reflection and correction, a reminder that human activity must remain aligned with divine and natural law. After gathering, the farmers offered a portion of the maize to the gods. This act of giving was deliberate and formal, not a casual gesture. The kernels were placed in ceremonial bowls, sometimes mixed with water or other sacred substances, and carried to temple plazas. Smoke rose from these offerings, drifting upward to join the stars. In the eyes of the Maya, the physical act of providing sustenance to the gods ensured the continuation of cycles, rainfall, growth, and harvest, and sustained the invisible threads linking past, present, and future. The offering extended beyond maize itself. Artisans would carve images into wood or stone, depicting maize stalks, ears, and kernels, integrating them into temple reliefs and stelae. Musicians played drums in measured rhythms, their sound echoing across fields and terraces, blending with the wind and the rustling leaves. Every sensory experience reinforced the sacred nature of the harvest. The tactile feel of the kernels, the visual brilliance of golden cobs, the scent of earth and smoke, and the resonance of sound. In this holistic approach, work, ritual, and reverence became inseparable. The harvest also reinforced social bonds. Families labored together, and neighbors helped one another, sharing tools and resources. The act of working side by side strengthened communal ties, creating a web of mutual dependence that mirrored the balance observed in the natural and celestial cycles. The success of one field became the responsibility and joy of the wider community. Through these collective efforts, the Maya expressed the interdependence of humans, gods, and the earth itself. As the sun fell toward the horizon, the fields shimmered with the golden light of late afternoon. Shadows stretched across rows of harvested maize, creating a pattern that seemed deliberate, almost ceremonial. Workers paused, setting down baskets, lifting hands to shield their eyes, observing the play of light and shadow. In these moments, the city and its people became acutely aware of the cycles governing their existence. Time, labor, and ritual converged into a single experience of presence and participation. Nightfall brought quiet reflection. The harvested fields rested under the glow of the moon, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of nocturnal life. Frogs called from shallow pools, insects hummed in the dense vegetation, and distant owls observed silently. The people of Tikal moved slowly through the terraces, carrying water and maintaining the stored maize, preparing for the nights ahead. Even in rest, the city remained alive, attuned to cycles that would resume with the next moon, the next rainfall, the next planting. For Balaam, walking among the harvested fields in the cool night air was an intimate experience of connection. He could feel the pulse of the land beneath his feet, the latent energy of growth now captured in the gathered maize, and the presence of the divine in the rhythmic order of the work. Every offering, every observation, every careful placement of kernels was part of an ongoing dialogue between humans and gods. The cycle of planting, growth, and harvest was a living expression of faith, knowledge, and endurance. And so, in the stillness of night, the city and its surrounding fields rested in anticipation of renewal. The maize, the moon, the stars, and the people were all part of an unbroken rhythm, a continuous cycle that had endured for generations and would endure long after individual lives passed. The harvest was complete, yet it was not an end. It was a point within a larger pattern, a moment of gratitude and preparation for the eternal return of life, work, and divine favor. The rhythms of the rain and moon governed life in Tikal as inexorably as the sun and the stars. The Maya observed the clouds with the same care they observed the heavens, interpreting their forms and movement as signs of blessing or warning. Rain was sacred, the visible breath of the gods falling from the sky to nourish maize, cacao, and the countless other plants that sustained the city. The absence of rain was not merely inconvenient. It was a disruption in the balance of the world, a reminder that human vigilance, ritual, and timing were necessary to maintain harmony. Farmers and priests alike watched the horizon for the first clouds of the wet season. The shifting winds, the scent of the earth, and the sound of insects were all signals that the rains were approaching. When the skies darkened and thunder rolled in distant layers, it was not a time for fear, but for preparation. Farmers would check canals, reservoirs, and terraces, ensuring that water could flow without obstruction and reach every field that needed nourishment. Offerings of maize, water, and incense were made to invoke protection and abundance, aligning human effort with the celestial and atmospheric cycles. The moon played a complementary role, casting a gentle influence over the night. Its phases guided planting schedules, and the crescent was observed for the promise of new growth. The Maya knew that certain crops, including maize, responded best when planted in accordance with lunar cycles. A full moon was a time for vigilance, for observing pests and potential damage. A waning moon was a period for preparation and reflection. In this way, the cycles of the night sky became interwoven with the cycles of labor, an unbroken rhythm that shaped both work and ritual. Priests carried this knowledge into the ceremonial aspects of life. They performed rites during moonlit nights, timing incense, offerings, and chants to coincide with lunar and planetary alignments. The sound of drums and rattles echoed across terraces and plazas, resonating with the pulse of rainwater flowing through canals and into reservoirs. In these ceremonies, the elements, water, air, fire, earth, were engaged directly, their movements and sounds interpreted as communication from the divine. The city itself became an instrument of observation and response, translating celestial patterns into earthly action. Rainfall was both practical and symbolic. The steady downpour fed the maize, replenished aquifers, and softened the soil for planting. But it was also an expression of divine presence. Each drop was considered a blessing, and the patterns of rain were interpreted as messages. A sudden storm might be understood as a call to renew ritual, to offer thanks, or to correct imbalances in human conduct. Drought, conversely, was a call to reflection, an opportunity to align behavior with cosmic law. Observation, patience, and ritual were inseparable in the maintenance of balance. The farmers themselves internalized these cycles, moving with a quiet awareness that bordered on instinct. They felt the weight of moisture in the air, the pull of the moon, the subtle changes in wind and temperature. Their hands, hardened from work in the soil, were sensitive to the texture of wet earth, the firmness of planted seeds, and the readiness of maize stalks. Their labor was guided not by clocks or schedules, but by the subtle cues embedded in nature, signs that required knowledge, attentiveness, and devotion to interpret. At night, the moon illuminated the terraces and pools, revealing patterns in the landscape that were invisible in daylight. Water reflected its light, turning canals and cisterns into silvery threads, and the stone of temples glowed faintly in the lunar illumination. Priests used these reflections to gauge alignment and timing, while farmers walked among the fields, observing moisture and plant growth with careful attention. Every night became an opportunity to learn, to interpret, and to act in accordance with the cycles of the cosmos. Even in the quiet moments, when no ceremony was performed, the interplay of rain and moonlight shaped experience. Mist would rise from the terraces in the early morning, clinging to maize leaves and glinting in the weak lunar glow. The city seemed alive in these moments, a living network of observation and response. Each element, stone, water, earth, maize, light, was in conversation with the others, and humans, as attentive participants, ensured that the balance persisted. Beneath this rhythm, the Maya perceived a continuity that extended across generations. Ancestors were thought to watch over the terraces, guiding human hands and ensuring that cycles remained unbroken. Observing rain, moon, and stars was both practical and devotional, an acknowledgement that life depended on understanding and cooperation with forces larger than oneself. Every rainfall, every lunar phase, every movement of clouds was integrated into an awareness that sustained not only the fields, but the entire fabric of society. As night deepened, the rhythm of rain and moonlight settled over Tikal like a gentle pulse. Pools shimmered, leaves dripped, and the distant roar of storms hinted at the ongoing work of gods unseen. Farmers rested in the quiet, their senses still attuned to cycles that would guide the next day's planting, the next phase of growth, and the next ritual. Even in sleep, they remained connected to this continuity, the cycles of rain and moonlight flowing through them as surely as through the land. Thus, life in Tikal was sustained not only by labor and ritual, but by the attentive observation of natural and celestial rhythms. The interplay of rain and moonlight shaped the city, the fields, and the hearts of its people, reinforcing a philosophy of harmony, patience, and interconnection. In understanding these cycles, the Maya found not only sustenance but meaning, seeing themselves as threads in a vast tapestry woven from earth, sky, and human devotion. As the moon reached fullness, its pale light bathed the terraces and fields of Tikal in silver. The full moon was a signal, a moment of heightened attention, when the cycles of earth and sky converged in a rare clarity. It marked a period for ritual, for offering, and for renewal. The Maya believed that the energy of the harvest moon intensified both human and natural processes, amplifying blessings and reinforcing the bonds between the people, the maize, and the divine. The harvest moon was anticipated long before its appearance. Priests observed the sky for the moon's waxing, noting its size, brightness, and position relative to Venus, the sun, and key constellations. These observations informed the timing of offerings, dances, and ceremonial activities. Farmers prepared the maize, reserving the best cobs for ritual use. Water and copal resin were gathered, and small altars were constructed at field edges and temple terraces alike. The entire city participated in a careful choreography that had been refined over generations. When the night of the harvest moon arrived, the city became both quiet and alive. The full moon illuminated the polished stone of temples, the terraces of maize, and the canals that reflected its glow. The farmers moved with a measured rhythm, carrying prepared offerings to altars and ceremonial spaces. Each gesture was deliberate, Maize was placed in specific arrangements. Water was poured onto the soil, and copal was burned to release fragrant smoke into the night. The acts themselves were a form of meditation, aligning human intention with cosmic order. Drums and rattles accompanied some of these rituals, providing rhythm to movement and sound to reflection. Music resonated with the pulse of the city, echoing across terraces and into the surrounding jungle. The vibrations of the instruments were believed to carry the prayers upward, reaching the attention of the gods who watched from above. Light, sound, and labor converged, creating an environment in which human effort, divine presence, and natural cycles were inseparable. Central to these rituals was the offering of maize. Farmers and priests selected kernels, cobs, and occasionally entire stalks for ceremonial purposes. These offerings were placed on stone altars, in bowls, and sometimes buried in the earth as symbols of renewal. The act was both practical and symbolic. It honored the forces that sustained life and ensured that the cycles of fertility, growth, and harvest continued without interruption. In offering the maize, the Maya acknowledged the debt owed to the earth, the rain, and the gods who shaped the world. The sequence of ritual gestures followed precise timing, guided by observations of moonlight on the temple stones. Light was used as a signal, indicating the appropriate moments to perform certain actions. As the moon traversed the sky, shadows shifted across the altars, marking intervals for pouring water, burning incense, or arranging maize. The careful alignment of moonlight with human activity transformed ordinary materials into sacred conduits, bridging the terrestrial and the celestial. In some cases, small carved figures representing gods, ancestors, or animal spirits were incorporated into the ritual. These figures were placed alongside maize and water, serving as intermediaries between the human participants and divine forces. Their positioning reflected both symbolic meaning and astronomical observation. Priests and farmers alike understood that the efficacy of the ritual depended upon the precise integration of material, gesture, and cosmic alignment. Devotion was inseparable from attention to detail, each act carrying consequences for the health and prosperity of the city. The rituals were also communal in nature. Families worked together, neighbors assisted each other, and the city's residents moved in coordinated sequences through terraces, plazas, and fields. Participation reinforced social cohesion, reminding individuals of their place within both the community and the larger cycles of creation. A harvest moon was not merely a moment for private devotion, but a collective act, a tangible manifestation of shared belief and interdependence. As the moon reached its zenith, the rituals concluded in a period of quiet reflection. Offerings were left in place. Altars stood illuminated by lunar light, and the scent of burning copal lingered in the air. The farmers returned to their homes, their minds filled with the sense of continuity, protection, and blessing. Even after the ceremony ended, the city and its fields remained under the watch of the moon, its silver glow marking the land, the stone, and the maize with sacred attention. Beneath the surface of ritual practice lay a profound understanding of time and cyclicality. Each harvest moon marked not only the completion of a season, but the preparation for the next. The actions of humans, guided by observation and ritual, ensured that fertility and balance persisted across generations. The offering of maize, water, and incense was thus both a recognition of immediate needs and a covenant with the future, a promise that the cycles of creation would continue unbroken. The quiet that followed the ritual was as significant as the activity itself. Farmers and priests observed the moon's reflection on pools, terraces, and polished stone, noting subtle shifts that might indicate upcoming changes in weather or celestial patterns. These observations were recorded mentally, passed along orally, and integrated into the ongoing understanding of cycles. Knowledge, like maize, was cultivated carefully, growing richer with each season and each generation. In this way, the harvest moon unified the practical, spiritual, and observational aspects of Mayan life. The maize fields, the temples, the canals, and the observatories were all part of a single interconnected system. Human labor, ritual devotion, and natural phenomena converged to sustain life and ensure harmony with the forces that governed the world. The city breathed in rhythm with the moon, the earth, and the gods, and the people moved through these cycles with awareness, respect, and humility. Beneath the full moon, Tikal rested in a state of quiet fulfillment. The maize now harvested promised sustenance. The altars, now illuminated and scented with copal, promised divine favor. And the city, alive with observation and ritual, promised the continuity of generations yet to come. For the Maya, the harvest moon was not a singular event, but a point within the ongoing cycles of life, a reminder that existence depended upon harmony, attentiveness, and the conscious integration of human activity with the rhythms of the universe. Once the harvest had been gathered and offerings made beneath the full moon, the labor of sustaining life shifted from the fields to the granaries. For the Maya, preservation was a sacred act. To store maize and other crops was not simply practical. It was an extension of ritual, an acknowledgement that life depended on careful stewardship and foresight. Granaries were as vital to the city as temples. Their stone and thatch structures, standing as silent guardians of abundance, memory, and future prosperity. The storage structures were constructed with the same care that guided temples and terraces. Elevated above the ground, they protected the grain from moisture, insects, and animals. Stone platforms supported thatched walls, allowing air to circulate and prevent rot. Some granaries were small, serving a single family, while others were large communal structures, ensuring that the city could endure drought, famine, or other challenges. Each was carefully aligned, sometimes with the cardinal directions, reflecting the same principles of cosmic order applied to sacred architecture. Inside the granaries, the maize was handled with deliberate attention. Each ear was inspected, the kernels examined for signs of imperfection or disease. The best seeds were set aside for the next planting, carefully wrapped or stored in ceramic vessels to ensure viability. This act of selection was more than agricultural prudence. It was a ritual of continuity. By preserving the most potent kernels, the Maya ensured that the cycles of growth and renewal would continue, binding past and future generations in a tangible chain of life. Water, air, and fire were also present in this process, though often indirectly. Granaries were positioned to catch gentle breezes, keeping the stored maize dry and cool. Smoke from nearby hearths, carried by wind, might permeate the structures, warding off pests. Rainwater, collected in terraces and cisterns, sustained both people and the next season's planting. Every element of preservation was integrated into an understanding of natural cycles, reinforcing the belief that human attention and divine favor were inseparable in sustaining life. Priests and farmers worked together in this phase as well. Offerings of maize and other crops were placed near the granaries, small altars marking both gratitude and protection. Ceremonial burnings of incense accompanied the storage, and sometimes carved figurines representing maize deities were set among the seeds. These gestures ensured that the spiritual integrity of the harvest was maintained even after the physical work was complete. The stored grain became a bridge between the material and divine, a reservoir of both sustenance and sacred energy. The preservation of seeds was particularly significant. Selected kernels carried not only the potential for food but also the lineage of generations. the continuity of culture and the expression of cosmic harmony. Farmers recognized patterns in the maize itself, variations in color, texture, and growth patterns, and preserved those that best embodied vitality and resilience. Knowledge of cultivation, observation of natural phenomena, and ritual practice all converged in this careful stewardship. Each kernel was a lesson, a promise, and a sacred trust. In addition to maize, other staples such as beans, squash, and chili peppers were stored using similar methods. These crops were arranged thoughtfully, their placement guided by practical considerations and symbolic alignment. The Maya recognized that the health of one crop affected the vitality of others, and storage practices reflected this interconnectedness. Granaries were therefore not merely warehouses but living embodiments of ecological understanding, spatial reasoning, and devotion. Throughout the city, granaries were integrated into the broader urban plan. Paths from terraces to storage structures were smooth and purposeful, minimizing damage to harvested crops and maintaining harmony with the surrounding architecture. Elevation and airflow were considered in tandem with sacred alignments, reflecting a worldview in which human, material, and spiritual realms existed in continuous conversation. Every aspect of preservation, placement, protection, and ritual reinforced the unity of life, labor, and belief. Observation did not cease once the maize was stored. Farmers and priests monitored granaries regularly, checking for moisture, pests, and signs of spoilage. Ceremonial attention accompanied practical observation. Small offerings of water, maize, or incense were repeated periodically, ensuring ongoing protection. Even routine maintenance was infused with awareness, a reminder that preservation was an ongoing dialogue with the forces of nature and the gods themselves. Beneath these careful practices lay an understanding of time and continuity. Each granary was a testament to the intergenerational labor required to sustain life, a physical record of cycles that extended beyond a single human lifespan. The maize stored within represented both the fruits of recent labor and the promise of future growth. Human hands shaped, nurtured, and safeguarded it, while divine oversight was acknowledged through ritual. Stone and seed, labor and prayer, observation and action were inseparable. As night fell and the moon rose above the city, the granaries glimmered faintly in the soft light. The stored maize lay in quiet readiness, poised to sustain families, rituals, and the city's enduring rhythm. The connection between the harvest, the fields, the temples, and the granaries created a network of continuity that intertwined humans, the divine, and the natural world. The act of preservation became an expression of faith, patience, and foresight, a quiet but essential ritual of life itself. Balaam walked among the granaries in the cool night air, feeling the weight of the stored maize beneath his hands, noting the care with which each kernel had been placed. He understood that in this act lay the same devotion and attention that guided stone carving, observation of the heavens, and ritual in the fields. Preservation was not passive, it was active, conscious, and sacred. It ensured the continuation of cycles, the survival of culture, and the alignment of human action with cosmic order. In Tikal, stone and seed, temple and granary, field and ritual, all existed as parts of a single system. The city's survival depended upon careful observation, skilled labor, and respect for cycles that encompassed both the terrestrial and celestial. In this holistic view, the Maya nurtured life with awareness, aligning every act with the rhythms of the earth, the moon, and the gods. Preservation, therefore, was more than storage. It was participation in the eternal cycles of creation. Water was the lifeblood of Tikal, shaping its streets, plazas, and terraces as much as stone or maize. To the Maya, it was not merely a resource, but a sacred force, a gift from the gods, and a symbol of continuity. Streams, reservoirs, and man-made channels reflected the belief that life depended on careful attention, observation, and ritualized stewardship. Every movement of water, whether falling from the sky or flowing through carved stone conduits, was imbued with meaning. The rainy season brought life to the city. Clouds gathered over the canopy, darkening the jungle and filling the air with the scent of wet earth. When the downpour began, it was both practical and sacred. Rainfall replenished reservoirs, nourished terraces, and activated aquifers beneath the limestone bedrock. The Maya had learned to capture and direct this gift, carving channels to guide water into holding basins, cisterns, and pools integrated into the urban layout. The flow of water was engineered with precision, blending utility with cosmic order. The reservoirs were marvels of design, often hidden within the city's core. Stone walls, shaped with care, held the collected rain and allowed sediment to settle naturally. Water entered through channels cut into terraces, and overflow was directed to additional basins or used to irrigate fields beyond the urban center. These structures were not accidental. They represented a deep understanding of hydrology, erosion, and seasonal variation. Each reservoir was a living system, requiring ongoing observation and maintenance. The city's streets and terraces were sculpted to accommodate water's movement. Slight gradients guided rain into channels, preventing stagnation or damage to stone structures. Steps, plazas, and platforms were arranged to catch and redirect runoff, reflecting both engineering skill and ritual significance. Water became a mediator between natural and human realms, carrying life and symbol, sustaining the population while maintaining harmony with the environment. The Maya also regarded underground aquifers as sacred. Wells and springs were carefully monitored, and their water was often incorporated into ceremonial rites. Priests observed the clarity, flow, and seasonal changes in these sources, interpreting them as messages from gods and ancestors. The quality of water indicated fertility, abundance, or potential imbalance, influencing both ritual and agricultural decisions. In Tikal, water was simultaneously practical, symbolic, and prophetic. Pools and ornamental ponds served additional purposes. Beyond holding water for ritual cleansing or decoration, they reflected light, carrying the sky into the heart of the city. Moonlight and sunlight interacting with these surfaces created patterns that were observed for ceremonial timing and interpreted for augury. The play of light on water enhanced the sacredness of the cityscape, linking material forms to celestial cycles and the spiritual perception of space. Observation of water was a constant practice. Farmers, artisans, and priests monitored rainfall, flow rates, and sediment. They noted the movement of clouds, the sound of streams, and the patterns of reflections in ponds and cisterns. These signs guided decisions: when to plant, when to offer tribute, when to perform ritual cleansing or purification. Water became a medium through which the Maya read time, understood cycles, and maintained alignment with the natural and divine order. Rituals involving water were frequent and meticulous. Priests poured offerings into channels, over terraces, and into reservoirs, acknowledging the spirits that governed rain, rivers, and the unseen currents beneath the city. The act of giving to water ensured both physical and spiritual fertility. Water was not passive. It was active, capable of receiving, transforming, and conveying life and blessings. Human interaction with it was always careful, deliberate, and reverent. The city's architecture integrated water into its daily rhythm. Platforms and temples often featured water channels along staircases or surrounding courtyards, marking ceremonial spaces and enhancing symbolic meaning. The sound of flowing water, mingling with bird calls and rustling leaves, created an auditory environment that reinforced the sacredness of movement and presence. Life in Tikal unfolded alongside these rhythms, each action reflecting attentiveness to the life-giving element that sustained both people and spirit. Even in drought, water retained its sacred authority. When rainfall was scarce, reservoirs and channels became centers of communal observation and ritual. People gathered to inspect water levels, clear debris, and perform offerings, maintaining both practical access and spiritual favor. The scarcity itself was interpreted as a call to mindfulness and a reminder of the delicate balance upon which the city depended. Water demanded attention, respect, and care, a constant teacher of humility and interconnectedness. Balaam often walked along the channels and reservoirs in the quiet of early morning. He felt the subtle vibration of water moving beneath stone, listened to its soft splashing, and observed reflections of the rising sun. In these moments, he understood the invisible connections that linked rain, aquifers, reservoirs, and canals to maize, stone, and ritual. Water carried memory and promise, sustaining life in both physical and spiritual senses. It was a living conduit, a sacred medium linking the city to the cycles of earth, sky, and human effort. The flow of water, like the growth of maize or the rising of the moon, established rhythm in the life of Tikal. Its presence dictated labor, inspired ritual, and shaped architecture. Every terrace, canal, and cistern was evidence of deep observation, skill, and devotion. Water was both substance and symbol, bridging human endeavor with cosmic design, reflecting the city's understanding that survival and spirituality were inseparable. In Tikal, to honor water was to honor life itself. The rains were more than nourishment. They were a conversation. As clouds gathered and the first drops fell upon Tikal, the priests prepared for ceremonies that honored both the earth and the sky. Water, flowing freely from the heavens, activated the city's sacred channels, filling reservoirs, canals, and pools. Each movement of the liquid was observed, measured, and interpreted. The Maya believed that through careful ritual, they could maintain balance, ensuring that the rains would continue to feed the terraces and fields while cleansing the city of spiritual stagnation. Ceremonies often began at dawn, when the light struck the surface of reservoirs, reflecting patterns across stone walls. Priests approached these waters slowly, carrying offerings of maize, copal, and ceremonial vessels. They poured water back into the pools, a symbolic gesture of renewal and return, acknowledging the cycle in which every gift received must be reciprocated. The sound of liquid striking stone became part of the ritual, a quiet music accompanying the prayers that rose to gods and ancestors. The ritualized use of copal resin was integral. Smoke from its burning was believed to carry offerings and prayers into the unseen world. Priests circled reservoirs, letting smoke drift over the surface of water while pouring small amounts of maize or grains into channels. These gestures reinforced the connection between the physical and spiritual realms, imbuing the element of water with sacred intent. Through repetition and careful attention, the Maya maintained an ongoing dialogue with the forces governing rain and fertility. Pools and reflective surfaces were used for divination. The priests observed ripples, glints of sunlight, and moonlight upon water to interpret omens. Patterns in movement and light indicated forthcoming weather, fertility, or potential challenges. Even the smallest variations were significant. To misread the water was to risk imbalance. To observe carefully was to align human action with the rhythms of the cosmos. Water became both medium and message, its surface a mirror of the unseen world. Community participation reinforced the sacredness of these rituals. Farmers, artisans, and children watched and assisted, carrying offerings, clearing channels, and maintaining terraces. The act of communal attention ensured that the city functioned as a unified whole, both materially and spiritually. Everyone understood their role in sustaining balance. The priests guided, the laborers executed, and the city observed itself in the reflective, flowing presence of water. Rain itself was ritualized. During steady downpours, the sound of falling drops upon terraces, leaves, and stone steps became a form of sacred percussion. Priests interpreted its cadence, strength, and direction. Certain patterns were considered blessings, signaling abundance and growth. Others warned of imbalance or impurity, requiring additional offerings or adjustment of ritual. The Maya's relationship with rainfall was active and attentive, a constant dialogue in which observation and ritual coexisted. At the heart of the city, large reservoirs served ceremonial as well as practical purposes. Water collected here was used in offerings to gods associated with fertility, maize, and rain. The surfaces reflected temple carvings, altars, and celestial light, creating a convergence of human craftsmanship and natural cycles. These sacred reflections reinforced the city's understanding that life depended upon careful observation, integration of labor and devotion, and alignment with cosmic patterns. Purification rituals accompanied water management. Priests performed ceremonial cleansing of terraces, channels, and pools, often accompanied by burning incense and chanting. These acts ensured that water remained both physically clean and spiritually potent. The Maya believed that stagnant or unobserved water could harbor spiritual imbalance, and attention to its condition was both practical and sacred. The act of cleaning became a form of prayer, a reaffirmation of the ongoing cycle of care. Moonlight amplified these practices. The reflection of the full or crescent moon upon pools and reservoirs provided both illumination and symbolic power. Rituals performed under moonlight were considered especially potent, connecting human effort to celestial rhythm. Priests observed the interaction of lunar light with the water, noting glints and ripples that could indicate upcoming seasonal shifts. The city itself became a mirror of the heavens, a network of observation that integrated ritual, water, and cosmic order. Even the canals and smaller channels played a role. Flowing water guided daily activity, connecting reservoirs to terraces and fields. Its movement was timed with ritual attention, ensuring both the physical distribution of life-sustaining water and the symbolic reinforcement of cosmic balance. Labor and devotion were intertwined, clearing debris, adjusting channels, and maintaining the integrity of stone conduits were as much acts of piety as they were practical necessity. Beneath these ceremonies lay a profound awareness of continuity. Water, rain, and reflection linked generations, carrying both memory and promise. The careful observation of movement, alignment, and ritual ensured that life in Tikal remained in harmony with unseen forces. Each drop, each ripple, and each reflection was a reminder of human responsibility within a broader eternal cycle. Preservation, observation, and reverence were inseparable. As night deepened, the city became a quiet symphony of flowing water. Pools glimmered under the moon, channels whispered in the darkness, and reservoirs held the accumulated rain in still reflection. Priests completed their ceremonies, offerings in place, and incense smoke curling skyward. Farmers returned to homes, carrying awareness of the cycles that governed their work. The city rested, yet the sacred waterways continued to move, embodying life, balance, and the unbroken rhythm of existence. In Tikal, water was never merely utilitarian. Its flow was observed, ritualized, and integrated into the city's spiritual and material life. The sacred waterways mediated between earth and sky, human effort and divine favor. Through attention, observation, and ritual, the Maya ensured that life persisted, that fertility was sustained, and that the cycles of creation continued with deliberate care. Water was both teacher and participant, guiding human action and reflecting the harmony of the cosmos. The architecture of Tikal was inseparable from the management of water. Channels carved from stone guided the flow of rain and runoff with precision, leading to reservoirs, terraces, and pools. These conduits were both practical and symbolic, reflecting the Maya understanding that human intervention must work in harmony with natural forces. Water moved through the city as a controlled river, threading life through streets, plazas, and fields while maintaining sacred order. Terraces, carved from limestone and reinforced with compacted soil, served multiple purposes. They stabilized slopes, provided planting surfaces, and channeled water into lower reservoirs. The Maya observed the angles and curvature of each terrace carefully, ensuring that runoff did not erode the foundations of stone structures. The flow of water across terraces was not random. It was measured, intentional, and aligned with celestial and topographical considerations, a silent orchestration that blended functionality with sacred geometry. Canals connected fields to terraces and reservoirs, creating a network that allowed the city to flourish even during dry periods. Water was directed with subtle gradients, sometimes following the contours of streets or the outlines of plazas. The Maya understood the forces of gravity and friction intuitively, allowing liquid to reach each terrace and channel with minimal loss. At the same time, canals were observed ritually. Priests and farmers interpreted flow, clarity, and sound as omens, reinforcing the spiritual significance of these practical structures. Each channel was lined with stone in key sections, preventing erosion and contamination. In other areas, natural soil was compacted and reinforced with plants that stabilized the banks. Small pools along channels acted as sediment traps, collecting debris and allowing water to enter reservoirs cleanly. The design reflected a keen observation of nature, a combination of engineering skill and spiritual insight. Channels and canals were instruments through which the Maya maintained balance, ensuring that water supported both life and ritual. Stone stairways and terraces often incorporated channels, allowing water to cascade in controlled sequences. These features were functional, providing irrigation and drainage, but also symbolic. Flowing water along sacred staircases or terraces mirrored cosmic patterns observed in the heavens, echoing the movement of rivers, rain, and celestial bodies. Light reflected from the water at precise angles, highlighting carvings, altars, and reliefs, reinforcing the connection between architecture, ritual, and observation. Pools and cisterns acted as nodes within this network, collecting and storing water while serving ceremonial purposes. Reservoirs were aligned with plazas, temples, and terraces, emphasizing their role in sustaining both physical and spiritual life. Water movement between cisterns and channels was observed closely. The sound, clarity, and speed of flow were interpreted as communication from the gods. Every drop that traveled through the canals was both sustenance and symbol, a tangible manifestation of the Maya principle that life and spirituality were inseparable. Maintenance of these systems was ongoing. Workers cleared sediment from channels, repaired terraces, and reinforced canal walls. Their labor was meticulous, reflecting an understanding that the failure of a single conduit could disrupt both agriculture and ritual practice. Priests often supervised, performing small offerings or blessings during maintenance to ensure divine favor. The act of upkeep was itself a ritual, a daily acknowledgement of the sacredness embedded in infrastructure. Observation extended beyond the city's immediate structures. During the rainy season, the movement of water in streams and rivers beyond Tikal was noted carefully. Patterns in natural flows informed canal management, reservoir capacity, and ceremonial timing. The Maya understood that their urban water systems were connected to the wider landscape, a network extending into the jungle, hills, and wetlands. Awareness of these connections reinforced the holistic approach to both survival and spirituality. Children and apprentices often assisted with minor tasks, learning to read the subtleties of water movement and channel alignment. They observed the interplay of light, flow, and sound, internalizing knowledge that would later guide planting, ritual, and engineering. Education was embedded in observation. Learning to work with water required attentiveness to detail, patience, and respect for both human labor and natural cycles. Even small deviations in flow were significant. A blockage, a sudden surge, or an unusually dry channel prompted action and interpretation. Repairs were made quickly, accompanied by ritual acknowledgement of the forces influencing the water. In this way, every physical intervention was accompanied by spiritual consideration, ensuring that human effort remained integrated with natural and divine processes. Water was active and responsive, shaping and being shaped by the city's inhabitants. The network of channels, canals, and terraces was not only functional, but aesthetically coherent. Flowing water traced geometric and symbolic patterns across the city, reflecting Mayan attention to harmony in all aspects of life. Stone, earth, and liquid were intertwined, producing an environment in which practical necessity and spiritual symbolism converged seamlessly. The city itself became a living diagram, demonstrating the intimate connection between observation, labor, and cosmic alignment. Beneath this system, water was more than a resource. It was a teacher. Its movement reminded humans of impermanence. Its reflections carried messages from the heavens, and its cycles reinforced the continuity of life. Walking along channels or terraces, one could sense the careful balance achieved by generations of observation, skill, and devotion. Every stone, every slope, every pool and conduit was a testament to the Maya understanding that survival, ritual, and the divine were inseparable. In Tikal, channels and canals were arteries of life, carrying sustenance, symbolism, and spiritual resonance through the city. They connected terraces to reservoirs, fields to plazas, and human activity to cosmic patterns. Through careful observation, maintenance, and ritual, the Maya ensured that water remained both practical and sacred, shaping the rhythm of life and the architecture of belief. In this flow, the city found balance, continuity, and the quiet pulse of existence. Within the heart of Tikal, pools served as mirrors of both the physical and spiritual worlds. Constructed with carefully cut stone and shaped terraces, these pools captured the reflection of the sky, the temples, and the observers themselves. Their still surfaces carried profound significance. They connected humans to the heavens, allowed the observation of celestial phenomena, and provided a focal point for ritual reflection. The Maya believed that water was a mediator between worlds, and the sacred pools embodied this belief in a tangible, daily presence. The design of these pools reflected deep understanding of geometry, alignment, and light. Stone edges were cut to precise dimensions, ensuring that the water's surface remained calm and clear. Placement was deliberate. Pools often faced specific temples, plazas, or cardinal directions, aligning with celestial observations and ceremonial activities. The reflective surface became a tool for observation, revealing the passage of the sun, moon, and stars in ways that guided both ritual timing and agricultural planning. Ceremonial practices incorporated the pool's reflective qualities. Priests performed rites at dawn and dusk, observing the mirrored sky as it shifted with the seasons. Offerings of maize, water, and copal were placed at the edges, sometimes floating gently upon the surface, their reflections amplifying the symbolic connection between earth and sky. The visual symmetry reinforced the belief that human actions, natural cycles, and divine forces were interconnected, each influencing the other in a continuous rhythm. The pools also played a role in divination. Priests interpreted ripples, reflections, and disturbances in the water as signs from gods and ancestors. The interaction between wind, light, and water created subtle patterns that required careful observation and understanding. These readings informed decisions regarding planting, rituals, and the timing of festivals. The sacred pool was therefore both practical and spiritual, a mirror through which the city discerned the hidden currents of life. Rituals surrounding the pools were carefully choreographed. Priests circled the edges, poured offerings, and conducted prayers that echoed softly across the water. Smoke from burning copal drifted over the surfaces, merging with the reflections to create a sense of ethereal presence. The observers, whether young apprentices or seasoned farmers, witnessed and participated in these acts, absorbing knowledge through observation and silent attention. The pools thus became centers of teaching, reflection, and spiritual continuity. The interaction between celestial light and the pools was of particular importance. Moonlight on the water intensified during full moons, casting silvery patterns across temple walls and terraces. Priests timed certain rituals to coincide with this illumination, believing that the lunar reflection enhanced the potency of offerings and prayers. Similarly, sunlight at specific times of year created reflections that marked solstices, equinoxes, or other significant calendrical events. The pools acted as instruments of timekeeping, integrating natural phenomena into the fabric of ritual life. Beyond ritual, the pools served as symbols of balance and calm. The still water reflected the city's architecture, the sky, and the participants themselves, reinforcing awareness of place, responsibility, and connection. Observation of the mirrored surfaces encouraged contemplation, a quiet acknowledgement that human labor and devotion were part of larger, ongoing cycles. Even during moments of rest, the pools reminded the Maya of the interdependence of life, water, and the divine. Maintenance of the pools was both practical and ceremonial. Debris, algae, or sediment was carefully removed, often accompanied by small offerings and blessings. Stone walls were inspected for stability, and terraces were adjusted to ensure proper water flow. These acts were not merely utilitarian. They were understood as participation in the sacred order, reinforcing the bond between human effort and natural cycles. The city's attention to the pools mirrored its attention to maize, rainfall, and the heavens, integrating observation and ritual in every action. Children observed the pools with guidance from elders, learning to read reflections, note the passage of light, and understand the symbolism embedded in water. This education was quiet and immersive. Knowledge was absorbed through attentive watching and subtle correction, rather than explicit instruction. Through these experiences, young Maya internalized a worldview in which the sacred and the practical were inseparable, where observation and devotion shaped perception and action alike. Even the smallest movements in the water carried meaning. A ripple from the wind, a falling leaf, or the faint disturbance of a floating offering could signal change or opportunity. Priests interpreted these signs within the larger context of celestial observation, seasonal cycles, and social needs. Reflection became a tool for understanding both the immediate and the distant, integrating sensory perception with spiritual insight. The pools were, in essence, living texts, carefully observed, read, and honored in daily life. At night, under the full moon or a crescent sky, the pools glimmered like portals. The city's lights, torches, fires, and the occasional flicker of offerings interacted with lunar reflections, creating a layered interplay of material and spiritual illumination. The water became a medium through which the Maya perceived both continuity and impermanence, a reminder that all life moved through cycles of reflection, renewal, and attention. Beneath the surface, the pools captured the essence of Tikal's philosophy: harmony, observation, and integration. They connected architecture, ritual, agriculture, and astronomy into a unified practice. Water was both subject and instrument, receiving and conveying life, knowledge, and sacred power. Walking along the edges, priests, farmers, and children alike could perceive the invisible threads that wove together earth, sky, and human action. In this way, the sacred pools were not merely decorative or functional. They embodied the principle that life required both attentiveness and reverence, that the cycles of the natural world were mirrored in human practice, and that observation of the smallest details could reveal truths about the larger cosmos. Reflection in water became a practice of seeing, understanding, and participating in the ongoing flow of life, binding the city, its people, and the heavens into a single harmonious system. In Tikal, water was never separate from life. It was interwoven into the city's rhythm, architecture, and spirituality. Canals, terraces, pools, and reservoirs formed a network that connected every aspect of existence: agriculture, ritual, and daily labor. The Maya recognized that human action, observation of natural cycles, and devotion to the divine were inseparable, and water became the medium through which these relationships were maintained. Every movement of liquid, every reflection, and every channeled flow carried both sustenance and symbolic significance. The city's residents engaged with water on multiple levels throughout each day. Farmers moved along terraces and channels to inspect irrigation, adjusting flow to ensure that maize and other crops received nourishment. Children carried small amounts of water to terraces or offerings, learning through repetition and observation the sacred and practical roles it played. Priests performed ritual inspections of pools and reservoirs, interpreting clarity, flow, and reflections for guidance on upcoming ceremonies, planting schedules, and communal needs. Each interaction reinforced the connection between the material and spiritual realms. Water guided the placement of ceremonies and altars. Pools reflected temples, plazas, and celestial alignments, informing the timing and direction of ritual acts. Channels, carefully engineered to transport rainwater, directed offerings to sacred locations, sometimes flowing past terraces, altars, or stelae to mark a path of blessing. In this manner, the city's infrastructure became a participant in sacred practice, a living system in which human intention and natural processes were mutually supportive. The act of offering to water was central to these integrations. Small amounts of maize, seeds, or copal were poured into channels or pools, blending with the natural flow. These gestures ensured that the divine forces controlling rain, fertility, and abundance remained acknowledged and appeased. The ritual was practical and symbolic. It maintained favor, sustained the city's crops, and harmonized human activity with cosmic cycles. In Tikal, the act of giving water was an act of understanding one's place within the universe. Observation extended beyond the city's boundaries. Priests monitored distant rivers, streams, and rainfall patterns in the surrounding jungle. The knowledge gathered informed local water management and ritual practices, connecting Tikal's urban environment to the broader landscape. The city was thus both observer and participant, a node in a network of life and spiritual responsibility. Water became a teacher, its cycles revealing the rhythms of growth, decay, and renewal. Ceremonial pathways often followed channels, integrating procession with observation. Priests and participants moved alongside flowing water, performing gestures that mirrored its movement. Reflection, flow, and sound were interpreted as signs, guiding ritual timing and reinforcing awareness of interconnected cycles. By engaging with water in motion, the Maya experienced the convergence of labor, observation, and devotion, learning to anticipate change and act with foresight. The integration of water and ritual extended to agriculture. Terraces and fields depended on controlled flow for fertility, and ritual acts ensured that water remained both potent and abundant. Fertilization, planting, and maintenance were accompanied by offerings and prayers, recognizing that each drop was both sustenance and sacred. The cyclical nature of rain, channel flow, and cultivation reinforced the Maya understanding that life required attention, respect, and alignment with forces larger than oneself. Pools and reservoirs acted as mirrors not only of sky, but of city life. Rituals conducted along their edges, often at dawn or dusk, were amplified by reflections of temples, plazas, and participants. Observing oneself and the surroundings in water created a sense of continuity, connecting past generations, current labor, and future growth. Reflection was a tool of meditation, divination, and instruction, reminding participants of the constant interplay between human effort, natural forces, and divine oversight. Maintenance of these systems was continuous. Channels were cleared of sediment, terraces reinforced, and reservoirs inspected for leakage or stagnation. Priests oversaw this work, combining practical supervision with ritual acknowledgement. Offerings were made to the water itself, recognizing that even the act of cleaning was part of a sacred cycle. Through this attentive care, the city preserved both its physical infrastructure and its spiritual harmony. Communal labor strengthened both social bonds and ecological understanding. Families and neighbors assisted each other in maintaining terraces and channels, sharing knowledge, tools, and ritual responsibility. Participation created a shared awareness that survival and ritual were collective endeavors. Water was a medium through which this awareness flowed, connecting individuals and communities in a network of observation, responsibility, and devotion. The city's architecture reinforced this integration. Temples, plazas, terraces, and pools were arranged to facilitate the controlled movement of water while enhancing its symbolic resonance. Rain channeled across terraces mirrored celestial patterns. Pools reflected the sun, moon, and stars. Channels carried offerings past altars to distant reservoirs. Through design and observation, Tikal's built environment became a living system that reflected and amplified the cycles of nature and ritual. Beneath the surface of daily labor and ceremony, the Maya recognized water as a sustaining and guiding force. Its flow informed planting, its reflection instructed timing, and its presence demanded reverence. Participation in the city's water systems became a form of spiritual practice, a continuous acknowledgement of dependence upon natural and divine cycles. Life, ritual, and architecture converged in the liquid arteries of Tikal, creating a network that preserved both survival and meaning. As night fell and reservoirs mirrored the moonlight, the city rested in a state of quiet vigilance. Channels continued to carry water, pools held reflections of temples and stars, and terraces awaited the next rainfall. Every element, the stone, the liquid, the labor, and the ritual, worked in harmony to maintain balance, sustain life, and honor the cycles that governed existence. In Tikal, integration of water and ritual was not optional. It was the very foundation upon which life, culture, and spirituality depended. Even after the grand cities of the Maya world had fallen into silence, their culture persisted through the enduring pulse of human practice, memory, and observation. Civilization, in this sense, was not measured solely by the permanence of stone or the visibility of monuments, but by the continuation of ideas, rituals, and knowledge embedded in the rhythm of daily life. The Maya legacy endured because its principles were enacted continuously, quietly, and with attentive care, bridging centuries and generations. Ritual remained a vital instrument of continuity. Seasonal festivals, offerings, and domestic observances sustained alignment between human activity and natural cycles. The planting and harvesting of maize, the tending of sacred fires, and the observation of celestial events were not merely practical or ceremonial acts. They were expressions of continuity, linking each generation to those who had come before. Through ritual, time was experienced cyclically. Memory was enacted, and civilization persisted as a living, embodied practice, rather than a static record. Astronomical knowledge continued to guide communities long after the decline of urban centers. The rising of Venus, the phases of the moon, and the solstices remained reference points for agriculture, ceremony, and social coordination. Knowledge of the heavens, preserved through careful observation and intergenerational instruction, allowed the Maya to maintain temporal awareness, predict seasonal change, and situate human activity within a cosmic framework. The stars became a language of continuity, a guide to living in harmony with both nature and tradition. Domestic life functioned as a vessel of cultural persistence. Courtyards, altars, hearths, and household rituals embedded memory, cosmology, and social norms within everyday practice. Children observed, participated, and learned, internalizing cycles of labor, observation, and ceremony. Households became microcosms of the city, small centers where the principles of order, time, and ritual were enacted. Through domestic practice, knowledge was preserved, passed on, and integrated into the lived experience of each generation, sustaining the pulse of civilization quietly and resiliently. Community gatherings and collective observances reinforced the continuity of social and cultural frameworks. Festivals and public ceremonies provided a shared space for memory, instruction, and reinforcement of social norms. Participation bound individuals to the collective, creating cohesion, identity, and a temporal rhythm that connected past, present, and future. Even in the absence of political authority or monumental oversight, social structures endured because collective memory and practice continued to guide behavior, observance, and understanding. Architecture, though weathered by time, continued to serve as a guide and anchor. Pyramids, plazas, causeways, and reservoirs retained their orientation and alignment with celestial events. Their presence in the landscape reminded communities of principles encoded in construction. The cycles of time, the integration of human activity with natural and cosmic order, and the importance of deliberate attention. Physical remnants, even in decay, communicated a framework of continuity that guided both practical and spiritual life. Transmission of knowledge remained a central mechanism for sustaining civilization. Elders, ritual specialists, and family members continued to instruct the young in observation, practice, and interpretation. Skills related to agriculture, ritual, craft, and astronomy were learned experientially, reinforced through participation, repetition, and communal observation. Knowledge was not simply taught, it was lived, practiced, and embodied, ensuring that culture persisted through the active engagement of successive generations. The persistence of memory, ritual, and knowledge allowed the Maya to endure beyond the collapse of urban centers. Civilization, understood as a network of practice, observation, and intergenerational continuity, survived because it was enacted continuously in homes, fields, and ceremonial spaces. Even without formal political structures or monumental authority, cultural principles remained alive, maintained through the attentive and deliberate actions of individuals and communities. Civilization was experienced, internalized, and transmitted, sustaining life and meaning across centuries. In this continuity, the pulse of Maya civilization was subtle yet resilient. Daily acts of observation, labor, ritual, and instruction maintained alignment with cosmic and environmental cycles. The rhythm of life, marked by sunrise, shadow, rainfall, planting, harvest, and festival persisted across generations. Each repetition reinforced memory, knowledge, and social cohesion, creating an enduring framework that supported both survival and identity. Civilization, in this sense, was a living, breathing pattern of attention and practice. Even in the present day, traces of Maya continuity remain. Agricultural practices, festival observances, and ritual traditions preserve knowledge accumulated over centuries. Community memory, embedded in both domestic and communal practice, continues to link people with their ancestors and with the cycles of nature and the cosmos. The principle of observation, continuity, and alignment, once enacted in cities like Tikal, remain alive in the rhythms of contemporary life, demonstrating the resilience of culture and the enduring pulse of civilization. Through the careful preservation of ritual, observation, and knowledge, the Maya ensured that their civilization could endure beyond the ephemeral permanence of stone. Memory, enacted daily, knowledge transmitted carefully, and rhythm, observed continuously. All these elements combined to create a civilization that transcended temporal collapse. The pulse of life, measured in attention, practice, and awareness, sustained the essence of Tikal and its sister cities, carrying their legacy forward across centuries. Civilization, therefore, was not defined solely by monuments or political authority, but by the persistent enactment of principles, rituals, and knowledge. In every household, courtyard, and communal gathering, the Maya maintained alignment with the cosmos, the environment, and the social order. Through this enduring pulse, culture survived, identity persisted, and the wisdom of generations remained accessible, sustaining both the continuity and the vitality of civilization itself.